Tonight, we're venturing deep into the Texas hill country, where the stars burn low, the air carries secrets, and every campsite hides a story best left untold. From lone lanterns flickering across silent lakes to the sound of footsteps circling tents long after midnight, these are 20 true scary camping stories from the Texas hill country that will make you think twice before unzipping your tent in the dark. But before we begin, here's something strange. Most viewers make one simple mistake. They leave without subscribing. And when they do, they miss out on the most chilling, true horror stories that only the bravest ever hear. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button right now, because what you're about to hear will stay with you long after the fire burns out. So, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Drop it in the comments, and because here the night never truly ends and the horror waiting in the dark is only getting started. Now, zip up your tent, stoke the fire, and listen close, because the hill country holds its breath for those who dare to camp alone. Let's dive into the darkness. I started fishing Inks Lake every spring after my divorce when I needed quiet more than company. It's a deep, still lake tucked between the granite hills north of Burnett, the kind of place that smells of cedar and wet stone when the sun drops behind the ridges. I'd park my old truck near the primitive sites, hike down to the waterline, and set up a small camp away from the RV crowd. Nights there have a heavy silence that feels alive, as if the whole hill country holds its breath. The first time I saw the lantern was on a Wednesday night in early April. The water was glassy, reflecting a bruised sky. I'd just thrown my last line when a faint yellow glow blinked on across the lake, maybe half a mile away. It looked like an old kerosene lantern, the kind my grandfather used in his shed. Warm, steady light, not the cold pulse of an LED. I figured another fisherman had hiked in from the west shore. Still, it was strange. That side was fenced off years ago. When the campground closed part of the trail for erosion, I could see the fence from my spot, a line of rusted posts jutting out of the brush. The light didn't move, didn't flicker in the wind. It just hovered near the shoreline, low to the ground. After a while, I reeled in, doused my fire, and told myself I'd check it out in the morning. But around midnight, when the frogs went quiet, the light went out too, as if someone had blown it out at the exact same second the wind died. The next morning, the water looked normal. No boats, no footprints on the opposite bank. I asked the park ranger about it when I stopped for ice. His name was Don, an older guy with a sun-carved face and a straw hat. When I mentioned the lantern, his smile thinned. "You must have seen a reflection," he said. "Nobody camps on that side anymore. Washed out after the floods. We pulled the markers 2 years back." I could tell he was lying, or at least hiding something, because he wouldn't meet my eyes. He handed me my receipt and changed the subject to boat permits. That night I set up in the same spot. I told myself I wanted to fish the same cove, but the truth is I wanted to see the light again. Around 9, just after sunset, it appeared, same place, same soft glow. I watched it for nearly an hour. Once or twice I thought I saw a figure move in front of it, blocking the light for a heartbeat, but I couldn't be sure. The air was perfectly still, and yet the reflection rippled across the water as though something were stirring beneath it. I didn't sleep much. Every rustle made me sit up, waiting to see the glow seep through the trees. When dawn came, I paddled my inflatable raft across, even though I knew it was against the park's rules. The western shore was steeper than I expected, tangled with vines and sharp limestone. I found old fire rings half buried and beer cans eaten by rust. But there was no tent, no footprints, no burned wood. What I did find was a single glass chimney from a lantern lying in the weeds. It was clean, like it had been washed recently. I turned it over in my hands and saw my reflection warped inside it. When I brought it back, Don spotted it in my gear and froze. "Where'd you get that?" he asked. I told him. His jaw worked for a second before he said, "You shouldn't have gone over there. A man died on that bank about 10 years ago. Fisherman. Storm came up fast. Lightning hit a tree right through his tent. We never found the lantern, just his tackle box and a burnt patch of earth." He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Locals say he still lights his lantern so folks don't make the same mistake." I laughed it off, but that night I couldn't bring myself to fish. I just sat by my fire holding the lantern glass and staring at the dark water. Sure enough, around 10 the light came on again. This time I knew for certain it wasn't a reflection. The angle was wrong. I could even see faint movement around it like someone pacing. I shouted across the lake something dumb like, "Hey there." The light froze. Then it started moving along the bank, slow and deliberate, tracing the shoreline toward me. The path it followed should have been impossible. There's a stretch of water 30 feet deep between the banks, but the glow glided right over it, steady as a candle in a jar. I backed up to my truck, watching that light skim the water until it stopped maybe 100 yards out. I swear I saw a shape standing behind it, taller than a man, shoulders hunched. Then the lantern tilted sideways and went under. The lake swallowed the glow like ink soaking into paper. At dawn, the ranger station was empty except for Don's thermos on the counter. I waited an hour before he came in from the dock. He looked like he hadn't slept. "You saw it again, didn't you?" he said before I could speak. I nodded. He sighed and pulled a folder from the desk drawer. Inside was an old photograph of a campsite, police tape fluttering in the wind. A small metal lantern sat on a log in the foreground. "That was taken the morning after the storm," he said. "See the lantern? When the recovery team went back that evening, it was gone." He closed the folder and told me the dead man's name was Henry Pike. Lived in Marble Falls, came every spring to fish for catfish. His body was found days later on the far shore, kneeling in the shallows like he'd crawled back toward the light. Don said some nights campers still hear him calling across the water, asking for help to find his lantern. "It's best not to answer," he added quietly. I packed up that afternoon. Before leaving, I walked to the dock one last time. The lake looked harmless in the sunlight, just kids swimming near the ramp and boats humming out toward the middle. But under that calm surface, I could feel something waiting. I tossed the glass chimney into the water. It sank with barely a ripple. For a moment, I felt relieved, like I'd given something back that didn't belong to me. That feeling didn't last. On my drive home, just as I crossed the dam, I glanced in the rearview mirror. A faint yellow glow flickered on the shoreline behind me, steady and patient. When I passed the next curve, it vanished. I've never gone back to Inks Lake, but every time I drive through the hill country at night, I keep my eyes on the horizon. Because sometimes out there between the hills, I swear I see that same soft light, shining from places no one camps anymore. It was late afternoon when we parked the truck near the edge of Palo Duro Canyon, just outside Amarillo. The light was burning that deep orange color Texas does so well. Dust in the air, the sun like a dying ember over the flat rim of the canyon. My friend Ryan had brought a cooler full of beer and a Bluetooth speaker, saying we needed a break from work, from everything. The canyon felt endless, a mouth in the earth swallowing sound. When you shouted, it didn't echo right away. It rolled around somewhere down there and came back strange, like it had traveled through something living. We'd both heard that Palo Duro had these talking echoes, old cowboy stories about the canyon repeating your words in voices that weren't yours. We laughed it off, of course. Still, when the sun started dipping and the wind picked up that whistling tone between the rocks, we couldn't help ourselves. Ryan stood on the ledge, cupped his hands around his mouth and yelled, "Hello!" The word bounced back a few seconds later, soft, drawn out like it had been caught in the canyon's throat. We laughed and cracked open another beer. Then he yelled my name. "Dan!" he shouted, the sound carrying across the vast open space. A moment later, it came back. Dan. But slower, warped somehow, as if the canyon itself were trying to pronounce it. I thought maybe it was the wind or some weird shape of the rock walls, but the second time he shouted, "Dan!" The echo came back with a lag that felt deliberate, like something was waiting. "Dan." Ryan turned to me with a grin that was too wide to be confident. "That's freaky, man. Try mine." So I did. "Ryan," I yelled, and the echo came rolling back. Once, then again, fainter. "Ryan," then silence. The wind died completely, which was the strangest part. The air had been moving all day, and now it was like the canyon held its breath. We stood there for a long moment, waiting for another echo, but none came. The sun slid below the horizon, and the rock faces turned purple and black. Ryan said, "Let's do one more before we go." And I told him it was getting dark, but he was already at the edge again, yelling something I didn't catch. I waited for the echo, but what came back didn't sound like his voice or mine. It was rougher, older. A man's voice, low and drawn out, repeating what Ryan had said. But it stretched his words like someone trying to remember how to speak. Ryan froze, looked over at me, and asked if I'd heard it too. I wanted to say no, but my mouth was dry. "Yeah," I said finally. "Let's pack up." We drove back toward the campground, but the road was just a thin line of gravel that twisted around rock formations and brush. My phone lost signal halfway out. The canyon on one side looked bottomless, and when the headlights cut across it, I could swear I saw something moving down there. A shimmer, like heat mirage, but it had shape. Ryan kept looking in the rearview mirror, muttering that he'd heard something calling from the dark. At the campsite, we got a small fire going. It should have felt comforting, but the air had gone strange, thick like before a thunderstorm. The canyon was a black wall behind us. Ryan couldn't stop glancing toward it. I tried to laugh it off, told him the echo was just messing with us, but he wasn't listening. After a while, he stood up and walked a few yards away toward the canyon edge again. I called after him, but he didn't answer. Then he shouted my name again, loud, urgent, and the canyon shouted it back clearer this time, like it was closer. Dan! Then again, Dan! But the third one wasn't Ryan. The voice was wrong, off somehow, like it came from inside my own chest. It said my name softly, not shouted, almost conversational. Dan. Ryan stumbled back into the firelight, pale and shaking. He said, "It's closer. It's down there, but it's coming up." I told him to stop, that he was freaking himself out. But then we both heard it. Not an echo, footsteps. Slow, deliberate crunches on rock climbing from below. You could hear pebbles scattering. A faint scrape of hands, or something like hands pulling at the canyon wall. Ryan grabbed the flashlight and aimed it toward the edge. The beam caught nothing but dust and scrub. Then it hit something. A shape against the rock, too thin, too long. It moved like it was climbing, but its limbs didn't bend right. When the light hit its face, or what I think was its face, it jerked away fast. Almost faster than the eye could follow. The echo came again, louder this time, but not from the canyon. From behind us. We turned, and the darkness between the mesquite trees looked wrong, thicker, as if it was holding something that didn't belong in it. I could see a figure standing there, tall and narrow, arms hanging too low. The firelight flickered across its body, showing a texture like cracked stone. Then it spoke, my name again, perfectly this time. Ryan bolted for the truck. I followed, nearly tripping over the cooler. The fire died behind us as if snuffed out. We tore out of there, tires throwing gravel, the headlights bouncing across the dirt. The voice followed us, echoing through the canyon walls. My name and his over and over, overlapping like 100 people shouting from different directions. When we finally hit the main road, we didn't talk. Not a word for 20 miles. Only when we reached the gas station near Canyon, Texas, did Ryan pull over and start breathing again. I told him it had to be something about the acoustics, that we'd freaked ourselves out, but he wasn't listening. He just kept staring out the window, saying quietly, "It learned our names." That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the motel room felt wrong. The hum of the air conditioner, the tap of the pipes. Around 2 in the morning I heard it again. Faint at first, then louder. A voice from outside the window whispering my name, not echoing but speaking it. When I looked, there was no one there. Just the empty parking lot. The highway stretching dark toward the canyon. I left Texas the next morning. Ryan didn't. He said he needed to go back. Needed to understand what that thing was. He texted me once that afternoon. "It's still down there. It keeps calling." That was the last message I ever got from him. A few days later, the sheriff's department found his truck near the same overlook where we'd first shouted into the canyon. The doors were open, keys still in the ignition. No sign of him, but they said they heard something when they searched the area. Voices, faint but clear, echoing from the canyon floor, calling both our names one after another. Sometimes when the wind picks up at night, I think I can still hear it. My name rolling low and hollow like it's traveled too far and too long to ever stop. When I first spotted the tarp tent, I assumed it was abandoned. I'd been hiking deep in the woods near Llano, Texas, far past the last marked trail, chasing that perfect quiet you only find when the world finally gives up trying to talk to you. The tarp looked old, sun-bleached blue, torn at the corners, sagging like the trees themselves were tired of holding it up. From a distance, it blended into the gray of the cedar trunks, almost invisible until I was close enough to smell it. That faint rot and rain scent of nylon that's been sitting too long in the dirt. It was maybe 20 feet from the creek, tucked behind a clump of mesquite. The kind of spot someone might pick if they didn't want to be found. I called out, "Hey there," mostly out of habit, the way you do when you stumble on a stranger's campsite. No answer. I thought maybe a hunter, maybe a drifter. Out here, both were common enough. I moved closer, the leaves crackling under my boots, and that's when I noticed something that stopped me. The shape of the tent wasn't empty. It sagged, but not completely. There was weight inside, like someone lying down. I told myself not to be stupid. Maybe whoever it was had gone for water, left their sleeping bag behind. I circled the tent slowly. No fire pit, no food wrappers, no backpack. Just the tent, half collapsed, and the stillness of the woods pressing in all around. I crouched and lifted a corner of the tarp to peek inside. The smell hit first, something sour and faintly sweet like fruit gone bad. My eyes adjusted to the dim. Inside was a sleeping bag zipped up tight, the bulge of a head-sized lump beneath it. I could see the faint rise and fall of breathing. That should have reassured me, but it didn't. The breathing was slow, too slow. I whispered again, "Hey, you okay in there?" Still nothing, just that steady mechanical rhythm. I backed away, heart thudding. I didn't know what to do. You don't wake someone in the woods like that. It's Texas. You never know if the person inside is just asleep or waiting with a gun. I decided to set up my own camp 100 yards upstream. The plan was to wait a while, maybe see some movement, maybe catch them stepping out. As evening bled into night, the sound of cicadas thickened the air. I built a small fire, cooked a bit of canned chili, but my eyes kept drifting toward the dark shape of that tarp down the creek. I tried to tell myself it wasn't my business. People sleep where they want. But every so often I'd hear something, a faint rustle, a dragging sound. Not like footsteps, more like something pulling itself through the dirt. Around midnight, the fire had burned down to embers. I heard it again, louder this time, and I could have sworn it came from the direction of the tarp tent. I grabbed my flashlight. My hand was shaking, which embarrassed me. I wasn't a coward. I'd hunted, camped, slept under worse skies. But this was different. The beam of light cut through the trees, catching the glint of the tarp. It looked exactly the same, still sagging, still unmoving. Then the light flickered across something else, footprints. Not fresh, but not old either. Bare feet, small, almost childlike, pressed into the mud near the creek. They led away from the tent and disappeared into the darkness. I followed them for a few yards, just enough to see where they turned. They circled back, not away from the tent, toward it. Like someone had been pacing. My throat went dry. I aimed the light on the tent again, and that's when I noticed the flap wasn't closed anymore. It hung open, swaying slightly, though there wasn't any wind. I could see part of the sleeping bag inside, still zipped, still shaped like a body. I stood there for a long time, fighting every instinct telling me to look closer. Finally, I stepped forward. I crouched low, hand on my knife, and shined the light inside again. Empty. The bag was zipped but flat now, deflated. No head shape, no body shape. I blinked hard, thinking I'd imagined the breathing earlier. Maybe I had. But the smell was worse now, stronger, rancid. I unzipped the bag slowly. Inside was nothing but a bundle of rags, old yellowed clothes, and beneath them a single human tooth. Something moved behind me. Not loud, just the faint crunch of dry leaves. I turned the flashlight. Nothing. The trees leaned close, their branches hissing together. I whispered again, "Hello?" My voice didn't sound like mine anymore. Then from deeper in the dark came the sound of that breathing again. Slow, steady, coming closer. I stepped back until I hit the tent. The flashlight flickered, then steadied. Between two cedar trunks about 10 yards away, I saw the outline of a man, or what looked like one. Tall, thin, head cocked at an angle that made my stomach twist. He was wrapped in what looked like the tarp, same blue plastic, torn and dirty. I could see his face partly through a gap where the tarp didn't close right. His skin was pale, stretched thin, eyes glinting white in the beam. He wasn't blinking, just standing there, breathing in that same slow, deliberate rhythm. "Hey," I said, because I didn't know what else to say. "I didn't mean to. Your tent, I thought it was abandoned." He didn't move. Then slowly, his hand came up from under the tarp. It was gray, mottled with long fingers that looked waterlogged. He pointed at the ground between us like he was telling me to look. My flashlight trembled as I aimed it down. There was another tarp, smaller, folded neatly. My name was written on a strip of duct tape stuck to the top of it. I didn't wait to see anything else. I ran. I ran until my legs gave out, until I couldn't hear the creek anymore, until I stumbled onto the dirt road that led back toward town. I didn't stop until I saw headlights, a truck passing by, and waved it down. The driver must have thought I was insane, mud-smeared, panting, eyes wide, but he didn't ask questions. Just drove me to the nearest gas station and left me there. The next morning, I told a ranger about what I'd seen. He nodded, said he'd check it out. When he came back a day later, he said there was no tent, no footprints, no tarp. Nothing but a patch of flattened grass by the creek and a few cigarette butts. I hadn't smoked that night. He said maybe I'd been camping near some squatter who moved on. Maybe. 2 weeks later, I went to grab my camping gear from the shed. I unzipped my duffel bag and there it was. The same blue tarp folded neatly inside. My name written on duct tape across the top. When the sun begins to set over Pedernales Falls, the river turns the color of rusted iron and the limestone gleams like wet bone. Locals say that's when you should already be back at your car, keys in hand, door shut, engine running. I used to think that was just country talk, the kind of thing rangers tell tourists to keep them from wandering after dark. But that was before the evening I heard the whistle. I worked at a small outdoor gear shop in Johnson City and would hit the trails every weekend, sometimes with friends, mostly alone. I liked being out there when the crowds thinned, when the air cooled and the water slowed to a hush. That night I stayed later than I should have, hiking the western loop as the shadows stretched long across the rock flats. The sound started as I passed the old pecan grove near the bend, a single sharp whistle. It wasn't like someone calling for a dog or trying to get attention. It was high-pitched, steady, and too even, like something mechanical trying to imitate a person. It came from downstream, where the trail dipped toward the lower falls. I stopped and listened, but it stopped too. The cicadas buzzed in the trees. The air hung heavy, smelling of mud and juniper. Then it came again, a little closer this time. A drawn-out note that made the hairs on my arm stand up. I called out, half embarrassed. "Hello, someone out there?" The only reply was the river lapping against the rocks. I started walking faster, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds. When I reached the wooden footbridge, the whistle came again, this time from behind me. I spun around. Nothing but trees in the fading light. It sounded close though, like someone standing 10 or 15 feet away. That's when I noticed something strange. Every time I moved, the sound seemed to shift too, always keeping the same distance. I could have sworn it was following me. I picked up the pace, feeling the sweat bead at the back of my neck. The parking lot was still 1.5 miles out, and the sun had already dipped below the ridge. I didn't want to run, there were snakes out there, loose gravel, but my nerves were shot. I started jogging anyway, glancing back whenever that shrill note pierced the air. When I finally reached the main overlook, the sound stopped altogether. The silence was thick. No insects, no wind. The river below looked almost black, smooth and glassy in the moonlight. I stood there catching my breath, trying to shake the feeling that someone was still watching me. Then from across the canyon, the whistle came again. Soft at first, then rising, stretching longer than before, like whoever was making it wasn't running out of air. I backed away slowly, feeling my throat tighten. It wasn't an echo. It came from the other side of the river, near the cliffs where no official trail led. I'd been down there once years ago, helping search for a missing hiker who'd wandered off after sunset. They found his pack the next morning, wedged between rocks downstream, but not him. The ranger later said the water had been unusually low that season, revealing parts of the old spillway that hadn't been visible in decades. Locals talked about caves under the falls, cracks in the limestone that went deep, far beyond what anyone had mapped. That thought crossed my mind now as I listened to the sound drifting back and forth across the canyon. It almost seemed to echo from inside the rock. I forced myself to turn away, muttering that I was done for the night. The trail felt unfamiliar in the dark, and every few steps I'd think I heard footsteps in the gravel behind me. When I stopped, they stopped. When I moved, they followed. Near the trailhead, the whistle came again. This time so close it felt like it came from right behind my ear. I spun around, heart hammering, but all I saw were shadows between the cedar trees. Then something shifted. Just the faintest ripple of movement near the ground, like someone crouched low, half hidden in the brush. I froze. The thing or person stayed perfectly still. I called out again, my voice cracking, telling them I had a flashlight and wasn't afraid to use it. But the moment I said that, the whistle came again, long and rising, and I realized it wasn't coming from the brush. It was coming from deeper in the woods, several voices now, whistling together in eerie, broken unison. I bolted. My boots slid on loose stone. Branches slapped against my arms, and the sound followed. High, shrill, weaving through the trees like something alive. When I finally burst out into the parking lot, I didn't look back. I jumped into my truck, slammed the door, and locked it. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. Just as my headlights cut across the trailhead sign, something flickered at the edge of the light. A silhouette standing where the trees began, motionless. Then came one last whistle, sharp and short, before the figure stepped back and vanished into the dark. I didn't go back to Pedernales Falls for months after that. But when I finally did, late that winter, the ranger I spoke with said he'd heard reports too. Night hikers claiming to hear music or calls that drew them off trail. Sometimes so far they had to be rescued at dawn. He told me about one man who followed the sound right to the edge of the lower pool, where the water swirls into the cave system below. The man swore he saw someone down there waving at him, but when rescue arrived there was no one, just footprints that ended at the waterline. The ranger laughed it off as tricks of sound in the canyon, but his eyes gave him away. A few months later, I was camping with a friend farther west near Fredericksburg. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of someone whistling out by the river. The same tone, the same pitch, long even mechanical. I sat there in the dark, barely breathing, and realized something that made my stomach turn. There hadn't been any wind that night. None at all. And the sound wasn't fading with the current, it was circling the camp, moving tree to tree. That's when I understood what I'd felt at the falls, that whatever made that sound wasn't warning people to stay away. It was calling them closer, and it didn't stay by the river anymore. It followed the ones who'd listened. Garner State Park was almost empty that October morning. Just a few campers and a thin mist still rising from the Frio River. The park staff had gathered at the ranger station to plan out trail maintenance before the weekend crowd. But when the call came over the radio, everything stopped. A hiker had spotted smoke near Site 42, deep in the Live Oak Loop, a campsite that hadn't been used officially in years. I was the senior ranger that morning, so I grabbed my truck keys and headed out. The road twisted through limestone bluffs and patches of cedar, and as I drove, I could see thin gray threads of smoke curling up between the trees. The air was still, too still for a fire to be burning on its own. When I stepped out of the truck, I smelled it. Not wildfire smoke, but the distinct scent of burnt wood mixed with bacon grease, like someone had just cooked breakfast. The site was tucked back against a slope overlooking the river, half hidden by live oaks. The fire pit was still warm, ashes faintly glowing red beneath a layer of gray. There was a metal coffee pot blackened with soot, a few enamel mugs, and a skillet resting on a log, its handle melted and warped. The strangest thing was how clean the area was. No trash, no scattered wrappers, no modern gear. Just canvas chairs, a cooler that looked decades old, and a faded green tent. I called out, thinking maybe some early hikers had slipped past registration. No answer. I circled the site. The tent was zipped shut, but there was a dark stain near the flap. Not blood, I thought at first, but something like old sap, sticky and brown. I unzipped the tent carefully. Inside were 3 sleeping bags neatly rolled, a lantern still warm to the touch, and on the floor between them, a Polaroid photo. It showed a family of 4, a man, woman, and 2 kids, maybe 8 and 10. They were sitting in the same spot I was standing in, smiling beside that same fire pit, same chairs, even the same coffee pot. But the photo was dated July 2022. That made no sense. I remembered the report from that summer. A family named the Harrisons had disappeared while camping at Garner Park. Their car was found near the river access, doors locked, food half-eaten inside. We'd searched the park for days. Nothing, no bodies, no clues, no signs of struggle. Just gone. I stared at that Polaroid and felt a cold wave crawl up my neck. The air around the tent was warm, but it felt wrong, like the humidity had turned thick and heavy, pressing against my skin. I radioed in, told dispatch I'd found an active fire at an unregistered site, possibly evidence from the old case. Before anyone arrived, I started snapping my own photos for the record. But when I looked through my camera's viewfinder, the tent didn't look the same. It seemed newer, cleaner. The edges of the photo blurred as if the world around it didn't quite belong in the same decade. I lowered the camera, blinked hard, and it was back to normal. Worn canvas, melted handle, dead fire. I told myself it was the morning light. I poured dirt over the embers, packed everything I could into evidence bags, and drove back. But the whole ride, I smelled that same burned bacon smell, faint but constant, like it had sunk into my clothes. 2 days later, I got a call from a park volunteer who was cataloging the evidence. He said, "Hey, you might want to see this. The photo you brought in, it developed differently overnight." I drove down to the office and looked at the picture again. The family was still there, but now the background had changed. The trees were bare and the fire was gone. The tent flap was open, and in the shadowed doorway a shape stood. Tall, thin, its face washed out by glare. You couldn't see its features, but you could feel its presence, like the photo had captured something that wasn't meant to be seen. We both stared at it, neither of us speaking. Finally, I said maybe it was a printing defect. The volunteer nodded, though he looked pale. That night I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I went back to the evidence locker. The photo was there, sitting under the fluorescent light. The shape was gone. The family alone again, frozen mid-laugh. I stood there longer than I should have, waiting for something to change. Eventually, I locked it up and left. On my way home, I passed the turnoff for the live oak loop. The park was closed for the night, but I swear I saw a faint orange flicker through the trees, like a campfire burning. I stopped my truck, turned off the engine, and listened. The cicadas had gone silent. Then faintly from somewhere deep in the park, I heard the crackle of firewood and the soft sound of a child's laughter. The next morning, I brought 2 other rangers and we hiked out to Site 42. The ashes were cold and the tent was gone. In its place was a patch of scorched earth and a ring of melted stone. We searched the area for tracks, nothing fresh. But there were marks in the dirt like something heavy had been dragged, looping from the site down toward the river. The smell was still there, that greasy, sweet smoke. When we reached the waterline, we saw the same thing all 3 of us later swore to in the report. Faint handprints pressed into the wet sand, small ones and large, leading out into the shallow current, then vanishing. After that day, the park superintendent ordered the area closed. We put up a new trail barrier, filled the site number from the map. I thought that would be the end of it, but visitors kept mentioning smoke sightings near the old loop, usually around dawn. A fisherman said he heard voices singing near the bend in the river, a woman's voice and 2 children humming. Another camper complained about the smell of burning bacon at 3 in the morning, though he was miles away from where the site had been. 3 weeks later, I found a new photo on my desk at the ranger station. No envelope, no note. Just a Polaroid, slightly bent, showing the same campsite as before. Same coffee pot, same chairs. But this time, there was a 5th figure standing behind the family. I couldn't make out the face, but its hand was resting on the father's shoulder, pale and long-fingered. I locked that photo away too, though I checked it every morning. Each time it looked a little different. The background trees turned darker, the sky more overcast. Eventually, the family's faces faded until only the figure in the back remained. We sealed off that area permanently after one of the junior rangers reported seeing smoke again. When he went to investigate, he found the ashes still warm, and 3 rolled sleeping bags laid out beside the pit. No footprints, no gear, no explanation. I asked him what time it happened. He said just before sunrise. That's when it always starts, I realized. The hour before the light breaks, when the park is quiet and the mist hangs low. Last month, a local photographer came by the station, asking for permits to shoot night scenes in the park. He mentioned finding an old trail not on the current maps leading down toward the Frio. He said there was a perfect clearing for campfire shots. I asked him which loop it was near. When he said Live Oak, I told him flat out it was off limits. He laughed and said that's strange, because he'd already taken some photos there the night before. He pulled up his camera to show me. There was the campsite lit by firelight, a family of 4 sitting around the flames smiling, roasting marshmallows. In the corner of the frame, barely visible, a ranger truck's headlights glowed in the distance. My truck. I don't patrol that side of the park anymore. Every so often, when the wind shifts just right, I smell that faint mix of wood smoke and grease drifting through the pines. Sometimes I think I see the light of a small campfire deep in the trees, flickering just long enough to convince me it's real. Then it fades and the night goes still again. But what haunts me most isn't the fire or the smell or even the photographs. It's the warmth I still feel when I pass that spot. Like the embers never died out. Like something down there is still waiting for someone to come back and sit by the fire one last time. On a cool October night, the narrow ribbon of FM 337 wound through the Texas hill country like a dark vein, its curves reflecting silver under a pale moon. The road between Leakey and Vanderpool was always quiet after sundown, save for the whisper of wind and the distant hum of cicadas. Around midnight, a man named Travis Horn pulled his pickup into a rest stop just west of Leakey, a lonely patch of gravel with a single picnic table and a dim security light flickering by the restrooms. He had been driving since San Antonio, heading toward Rock Springs for a delivery, but the long drive and the endless dark had started to wear on him. His eyes ached, and the cold night air was thick with fog rolling off the hills. He parked facing the brush line, left the engine idling, and leaned back in his seat for a quick nap. The radio played faint country static before cutting off entirely. That stretch of road barely got reception on a good day. Travis rubbed his eyes and looked out the windshield. The light mist had started to cling to the glass, turning the world outside into a blur of gray and silver shapes. The fog deepened until he could barely make out the picnic table anymore. He shut off the engine, the sudden silence pressing in hard. The only sound was the faint creak of tree branches somewhere in the dark. He reclined his seat, crossed his arms, and tried to let the hum of crickets lull him to sleep. He wasn't sure how long he dozed before the sound came, a light tapping on the glass. Not a hard knock, more like fingertips brushing the fogged windshield. His eyes shot open, his breath catching. He sat still for a few seconds, staring ahead, waiting to see if it came again. The fog outside was thicker now, swirling under the flickering light, and for a moment he wondered if maybe a bug or a piece of debris had hit the truck. But then it came again, 3 soft taps, one after another. This time they were unmistakable. He sat up, wiping the condensation from the inside of the windshield with his sleeve. That was when he saw it. A small handprint was pressed into the fogged glass on the outside, right in front of his face. It was faint at first, then clearer as the moisture beaded around it. Tiny fingers, too small to belong to any adult. Each ridge perfectly formed as if a child had pressed their palm against the glass just seconds ago. Travis's stomach dropped. He blinked hard, leaned closer, but there was no one there. The fog beyond the glass seemed to shift as if someone had just stepped back into it. He turned on the headlights, the beams cutting through the mist but revealing nothing except the picnic area and a scattering of gravel. He waited, the engine off, heart thudding. The air felt colder now, heavy, and he could smell the faint, sweet scent of burned wood like an old campfire long extinguished. He stepped out of the truck, his boots crunching on gravel, and called out softly, "Hey, is someone out there?" His voice disappeared into the fog. He walked around to the front of the truck and touched the glass where the handprint had been. It was still there, smudged but fresh, the moisture running from the edges. The air around him was utterly still, no wind, no rustle of trees. He listened for the sound of movement, maybe an animal or a kid playing a trick. But the world felt empty. The security light buzzed faintly, flickering again, and for a moment he thought he saw something near the tree line, a shape low to the ground, crouched, facing him. He froze. The shape didn't move, but as the light flickered, it seemed to shift in distance, closer than before, then gone altogether when the light steadied. His throat went dry. He turned back to the truck, deciding to get inside and lock the doors. As he reached for the handle, a child's voice came from the fog, soft and almost playful. "Mister, can you help me find my daddy?" Travis stopped cold. The voice was clear but muffled, like it came through heavy cloth. He turned toward the sound, squinting into the fog. "Where are you?" he called out, his own voice shaking a little. "You hurt?" No answer. Just the faint drip of condensation from the trees. Then again, closer this time. "I'm lost. My daddy went down the road." The words echoed strangely, too even, like they were being repeated. He took a step back toward the truck. "Okay, stay where you are," he said. "I'll call for help." He reached for his phone, but the screen stayed black. No signal. He swallowed hard and looked up, scanning the brush around the rest area. The fog was thinning just enough to see shapes. The picnic table, the restrooms, the distant wooden sign marking the turnoff. But no movement. Then something caught his eye near the sign. A figure standing still. Small. A child's height. He called out again, "Hey there, you okay?" The figure didn't move. He squinted, trying to make out the details, but all he could see was the faint outline of a head and shoulders. It looked like a boy, maybe 8 or 9, wearing something light-colored. Travis took a few cautious steps forward. The gravel under his boots seemed unnaturally loud. When he was about halfway across the lot, the security light behind him buzzed again and went dark completely. For a few heartbeats, he stood in total blackness. The night swallowed him whole. Then the light came back on, and the figure by the sign was gone. He turned around quickly, scanning the area. Nothing but fog and shadows. He hurried back to the truck, climbed inside, and locked the doors. The engine started on the first try, and he immediately turned the high beams on. As the lights cut through the mist, he saw movement again, a shape darting past the edge of the picnic table, too fast to see clearly. His heart pounded. He shifted into gear and was about to pull out when the passenger door handle rattled sharply. Once, twice, then again. Someone was trying to open it. He shouted, "Hey, stop!" and slammed the lock down. Silence followed. He leaned across the seat, looking through the side window, but saw nothing. Then slowly, as if drawn by invisible breath, a fresh handprint appeared on the inside of the windshield. This time from the inside. Smaller than the first, perfectly centered in front of his face. He jumped back, his body pressing against the seat. The glass was cold, his breath fogging it further, but the new print stayed clear and distinct. He reached out with trembling fingers and touched it. The glass was freezing, almost biting to the touch. He jammed the truck into drive and tore out of the rest stop. Gravel spitting behind the tires. The road ahead twisted and climbed, the fog breaking apart under the speed. He kept glancing at the windshield. The handprint was still there. When he finally reached the next town, he pulled into a gas station near Leakey's Edge, his hands shaking as he shut off the engine. The handprint had faded by then, but a faint outline still lingered in the condensation. He sat there for a long time, trying to steady his breathing. The clerk came out to ask if he was all right, and Travis just nodded, unable to explain. The man pointed at the direction he came from and said, "You don't want to pull off around those hills at night. That rest stop's been closed for years. They fenced it off after that accident." Travis frowned. "Accident?" The clerk nodded. "A family wrecked out there about 10 years ago. Father, mother, little boy. They say the truck caught fire before anyone could get to them. Folks still see smoke sometimes or hear a kid calling for help. Rangers don't like to talk about it." Travis looked down at his hands. His palms were damp, and when he lifted them off the steering wheel, he saw faint smudges, like the residue left from pressing against glass. Small, perfect finger marks that weren't his. He wiped them away, started the truck again, and drove toward the highway, avoiding the rearview mirror the entire time. But as he merged onto the main road and the fog began to lift, he glanced up once, just for a second, and saw a shape in the truck bed reflected in the mirror. Small, crouched, watching him through the back window. When he blinked, it was gone. But the glass behind his seat held one last handprint, smaller than the rest, pressed deep into the cold. The limestone caves outside Junction weren't supposed to go that deep. They were a hangout spot for local teens, a place to sneak beer, take photos, and pretend to explore. I'd been there a dozen times myself, but that night felt different from the start. There was something heavy in the air, something that made even the most confident of us hesitate before we went in. It was late March, humid and still. The Guadalupe River was running low, and the limestone cliffs glowed white under the moonlight. There were 4 of us, me, Tyler, his cousin Reed, and Hannah. We parked near the ranger gate, climbed the fence, and hiked down the dry creek bed with headlamps cutting through the dark. Tyler had found a printout online, a hand-drawn map from some geology forum showing a supposed 3rd chamber deeper than anyone usually went. He swore the cave had once been part of a larger system that extended under the hills, sealed after a flood decades ago. I didn't really believe him, but I wasn't about to miss out. We reached the cave entrance after a half hour, slipping through the narrow crack between rocks that opened into a low tunnel. The limestone was cold and damp, slick with mineral buildup. Every sound echoed, our laughter bouncing back like faint whispers. Inside the first chamber, we lit up our lanterns. The air smelled of dust and bat droppings, mixed with that earthy mineral tang of wet stone. The graffiti was familiar. Names, hearts, crude drawings, but some looked newer, almost wet, like the paint hadn't fully dried. I touched one with my glove. It was sticky dark red. I told myself it was rust or some kind of clay, but it didn't feel right. We crawled through the low corridor that connected the first 2 chambers, the space tightening until we had to go on hands and knees. When we came out, the second chamber opened like a small cathedral. The ceiling stretched high, the light from our lamps catching on pale formations that shimmered like frost. It was quiet, too quiet. No sound of water, no breeze, not even the faint chirp of bats. That's when Tyler found the footprints. At first we thought they were ours, but the pattern didn't match. These were barefoot prints, smaller than any of ours, leading from the edge of the chamber toward a crack in the far wall. The limestone floor was coated in a thin layer of silt, soft enough to hold impressions. The prints looked recent, the edges still defined. Reed crouched beside one, tracing the outline with his finger. "These are fresh," he said, "like today fresh." We all looked at each other. No one else was supposed to be down there. The park had been closed for months for restoration, and the only entrance was the one we used. Tyler grinned, trying to shake off the tension. "Maybe some other kids got here first," he said, but his voice didn't sound convinced. The prints led right up to the crack in the wall, a dark slit barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. We argued for a minute about whether to follow them. Hannah wanted to go back. She said her light was dimming and she didn't like the feeling of the air. It was getting colder, heavy in her lungs. But Tyler pushed forward, squeezing into the crevice first. His voice echoed faintly, calling back for us to come on. I followed him, the rock pressing against my side, scraping my pack. For a moment I thought I'd get stuck, but then the space opened up into a narrow tunnel sloping downward. The air grew wetter as we descended. Water dripped somewhere, slow and steady. Our lights hit walls coated in slick mineral layers that glistened like glass. The tunnel twisted, then dropped sharply into a larger chamber none of us had ever seen before. It wasn't on the map. The walls curved smooth and pale, carved by ages of underground water. And in the middle of the floor were more footprints, dozens of them crisscrossing the mud. Some large, some small, all bare. Reed bent down again, this time shining his light closer. "These go both ways," he whispered. "In and out." I felt my throat tighten. "From where?" He pointed to a dark opening on the far side, low and round like a burrow. Something about it made my stomach twist. The air coming from that hole was colder, carrying a faint smell like wet iron. We didn't talk much after that. Tyler tried to act brave, but I saw the tremor in his hands. "Let's just check it out real quick," he said. "Then we'll head back." I wanted to refuse, but no one wanted to be the one who chickened out. So we crouched and crawled toward the opening, our lights cutting across the mud. That's when I saw it, another footprint forming in the damp soil right in front of us. I watched the silt shift and sink, the outline appearing inch by inch as if an invisible foot had just stepped there. Hannah gasped and dropped her light. The beam rolled across the ground, landing on the wall. There, drawn in dark streaks, were handprints, small ones layered over each other, dozens deep, leading upward toward the ceiling. Reed grabbed Hannah's arm and said we should go. I agreed instantly, but Tyler was still staring at the fresh print. "Did you see that?" he whispered. His voice cracked. Then faintly, from deeper in the tunnel, came a sound. A voice. It was high and soft, like a child calling from far away. It echoed strangely, bending around the stone. At first it sounded like words, but the tone was wrong. Too even, too smooth, repeating in a rhythm that didn't sound human. It said something like Tyler, drawn out, echoing again and again. We froze, then it said my name. Eli, and drawn out in that same cold, distant voice. I don't remember deciding to run. I just turned and bolted, slamming into the narrow passage we came through. The others followed, our lights bouncing wildly. I could hear the voice behind us repeating our names in that same calm rhythm. Never louder, never closer, just there. The tunnel seemed longer, going back, the air thicker. I scraped my shoulder raw, squeezing through the crack, then stumbled into the larger chamber. Tyler was right behind me. Then Reed, dragging Hannah, who was crying. We didn't stop until we reached the first chamber again, the one with the graffiti. But something had changed. The walls were covered now in those same handprints, black and wet-looking, and the air smelled of earth and rot. My headlamp flickered, and for a split second I saw movement at the far end of the chamber, shadows slipping along the stone. Then the lights went out completely. We made it out somehow. I don't remember the climb or the hike back. When we reached the truck, dawn was just breaking and we didn't say a word. Tyler drove in silence all the way back to Junction. None of us ever told anyone what we saw. But 2 days later, I got a call from Hannah's mom. She said Hannah hadn't come home since the night we went out there. She thought maybe she'd gone camping again. I told her I didn't know anything. They searched the area for a week. They found her backpack at the entrance to the cave, torn and muddy. Inside were her flashlight, some snacks, and a folded piece of paper. It was the same map Tyler had printed, but someone had drawn on it, adding a new line deeper into the cave, looping downward into an unmarked space. Next to it, written in mud, were 4 names, ours, each one crossed out except hers. Sometimes I still hear it when I drive past Junction. That faint echo under the hills, my name, drawn out slow and hollow, coming from the limestone deep beneath the ground. The ridge locals call Devil's Backbone runs between Wimberley and Blanco, cutting across the limestone hills in long, pale curves that glow under moonlight like the spine of some giant buried beast. At dusk it looks almost beautiful, but everyone who's grown up around there will tell you not to drive it after dark. It's not superstition, not entirely. Too many people have gone off that ridge. Their cars found twisted at the bottom of the ravine days later, headlights still faintly glowing in the trees. Folks say there's something up there that waits for the lonely and the curious, something that looks like a girl but isn't. Dylan had heard those stories since he was a kid. He'd grown up in San Marcos and camped all over the hill country, but Devil's Backbone always had a pull to it. When he was 26, his friends dared him to camp alone up there for a night. It was just a friendly bet, the kind that comes up when beer loosens courage. Dylan had his old Tacoma, a decent tent, and a small camp stove. He figured one night under the stars wouldn't hurt anyone. He left late after work, heading west with a cooler and a sleeping bag tossed in the back. The road wound like a ribbon between the hills, the last orange light fading behind the mesquite. The locals had put up a few new signs warning of deer crossings and sharp curves, but the place still felt wild and ancient. There weren't many streetlights, just the rare porch glow from distant ranch houses. His phone lost signal about 15 minutes in, and that was fine by him. He wasn't planning on calling anyone anyway. He found a small pull-off near a patch of cedar trees and parked. The wind had that dry, whispering sound it gets in the hill country, almost like voices passing through leaves. He set up his tent just off the gravel shoulder and cooked a can of chili on the stove. By 10, the sky was black and heavy with stars. Coyotes yipped somewhere far off. He leaned back against the truck bed, half listening, half dreaming. It was the kind of stillness that could either comfort you or start gnawing at your nerves if you let it. Around midnight, he heard footsteps. At first, he thought it was a deer, but they were too light, too deliberate. He sat up, listening hard. The footsteps stopped just outside the ring of his lantern light. He called out, "Hey, someone out there?" No answer, just the wind sliding between the trees. Then he caught a faint sound like humming. A girl's voice, soft and tuneless, drifting just beyond sight. His skin crawled. He stood and swept the flashlight around, catching only brush and empty road. When he turned back toward the tent, he froze. There was someone standing beside it. A girl, maybe 17 or 18, wearing a pale dress that hung loose and still despite the wind. Her hair was long and tangled, and her face was turned slightly down so he couldn't see her eyes. She wasn't dirty or ghostly looking, just wrong in the way she stood, like she'd been standing there for a very long time. "Are you okay?" he asked, voice catching. The girl didn't move. She just lifted one hand and pointed down the ridge toward the darker stretch of road. Dylan felt a deep pulse of dread, something primal. He didn't know what she wanted him to see, and he didn't want to know. He grabbed his keys and backed toward the truck. When he blinked, she was gone. He didn't wait to figure it out. He climbed in and started the engine, headlights cutting through the brush. The ridge road twisted sharply and every turn looked the same. His hands were slick on the wheel. He told himself she must have been some lost hitchhiker, maybe high or sick. But the air inside the cab felt heavy, almost thick, like someone else was breathing in there with him. The radio crackled on its own, static hissing through a dead channel. He reached out to turn it off, but the dial spun without resistance, the speakers popping with faint whispers that made his stomach twist. He thought he heard his own name. Then something tapped against the passenger window. He turned. The girl was there, keeping pace beside the truck as if the wind carried her. Her face was closer now, pale and calm. Her eyes dark like holes burned in paper. She mouthed something he couldn't hear. He hit the gas, tires spitting gravel, but she didn't fall behind. The next curve came fast, sharper than he remembered. He swung the wheel too hard. The truck fishtailed, and for a split second the headlights caught a narrow cross standing by the roadside. A small one with a bouquet of fake flowers tied to it. Then everything went weightless. He woke up with the engine ticking beside him, the cab tilted at an angle. The front end had wedged into a shallow ditch not far from a sheer drop. His chest ached where the seatbelt had caught him. He climbed out, shaking, and looked around. The ridge was silent again. His flashlight beam wobbled over limestone and cedar, no sign of her anywhere. The truck was banged up but still drivable. He backed out carefully and turned around, heading for the main road. He didn't look in the mirrors. He didn't want to see what might be sitting in the bed. By the time he reached Wimberley, the first light of morning was bleeding over the hills. He stopped at a gas station to wash the blood from a small cut on his temple. The clerk, an old man with cloudy eyes, glanced at the dirt and scrapes on the truck and said, "You took the backbone last night, didn't you?" Dylan nodded numbly. The man sighed. "Shouldn't go up there after dark. There's a girl who walks that ridge. She was in a wreck back in '97. Car went over with her little brother inside. Folks say she's been trying to wave people down ever since, but if you stop for her, she gets in." Dylan didn't answer. He just paid for his coffee and left. On the way home, he checked the passenger seat out of instinct. The fabric was damp, like someone had sat there with wet clothes. He drove the rest of the way with the windows down, letting the wind dry it out, pretending it was just rain or spilled water. But when he looked in the mirror that night, parked safe in his driveway, he saw a handprint on the inside of the glass. Small, perfectly formed, pressed there from the outside edge of the passenger seat. He sold the truck 2 weeks later and never camped again. He told people it was because of the wreck, that it shook him up too bad. But every now and then, when he drives through that stretch in daylight, he can still see her in his mind, standing at the curve, hair blowing, hand raised like she's asking for help. The cross is still there too, half hidden in the grass, the fake flowers faded to white. And though he tries not to look, he swears there's another one just a few yards down now, newer with a name he doesn't dare read. The locals around Leakey never talked much about Trail 9 anymore. You wouldn't find it on the park maps, not even the old ones with faded edges they still handed out at the ranger station. There was Trail 1 through 8, and then the ridge trails further out, but 9 had been erased long ago, after something happened there one summer night about 15 years back. Folks said it was a mountain lion attack. Others swore it wasn't an animal at all. What was left of the 2 college kids who'd wandered that way didn't look like any cougar had done it. At least according to one retired ranger who'd gotten too drunk at the Blanco General Store and let that slip before his daughter shut him up. I hadn't thought about it in years, not until last week when I went back out there. The place had been my father's favorite park when I was a kid. We used to camp near the river, eat cold beans from the can, and hike till sundown. He'd tell me ghost stories under the cedar branches, making up monsters that lived between the limestone boulders. He died 3 years ago, and I hadn't been back since the funeral. But last week I took a few days off work, packed the tent, and decided to go walk those old trails again. The first thing I noticed when I pulled into the lot near the trailhead was the heat, that thick, humming hill country heat that made the air shimmer. The place was quiet except for the cicadas and a few distant car doors slamming. The ranger kiosk had a new roof, but the same corkboard full of laminated notices. One caught my eye. A missing hiker from last summer, a man in his 50s. It said he'd wandered off a marked path and hadn't been found. The photo showed him smiling next to a blue cooler. I remember thinking he looked like the kind of guy who just overestimated his stamina. I hiked Trail 3 that day. Nothing unusual. The cedar smelled sharp and the limestone dust clung to my boots. I stayed until the shadows stretched long, then headed back toward camp, passing the intersection where the trails forked. That's when I saw it, a new wooden sign nailed to a tree. Fresh lumber, letters carved deep and painted black, Trail 9. I stopped dead. The sun was dipping low and the woods had gone that strange quiet right before night falls. I stared at the sign, certain it hadn't been there before. Someone had even wiped the bark clean where it was nailed in. It looked new, like it had gone up within the week. For a moment I thought it might be some kind of prank, maybe kids trying to freak people out. Still, something about it tugged at me. I walked over to where it pointed. A faint path wound through the trees, barely visible beneath the grass. It looked like it hadn't been used in years. I took a few steps in. The smell changed immediately. Less cedar, more earth, damp and stale. My father's voice echoed in my mind. Don't ever follow a trail that doesn't want to be found. I smiled at that and turned back. But that night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Sitting by the campfire, listening to the slow hiss of the river, I kept replaying that image. The new sign, the empty path, the way the woods had seemed to breathe in silence when I'd stepped closer. Finally, just before midnight, I grabbed my flashlight and decided to walk back up there. I told myself I'd only go a little way, just enough to satisfy my curiosity. The moon was a thin smear behind the clouds when I reached the trailhead. The sign was still there, pale in the flashlight beam. I ran my fingers over the carving. The wood was rough and splintered at the edges, like it had been cut with a dull knife. The nails holding it were old and rusted, though, which didn't make sense. The wood was new, but the nails looked like they'd been there forever. The path beyond was narrow, the brush closing in on both sides. I walked carefully, light sweeping ahead. Every sound carried. My boots crunching, insects buzzing, a distant drip of water somewhere. The deeper I went, the colder the air felt. My breath started to fog, which was strange for a Texas night in June. The ground sloped down into a shallow ravine, and that's where I found the old marker post, half buried in vines. The number 9 was still burned into it, black against gray wood. The beam of my flashlight caught something metallic nearby. I stepped closer and saw an old trail camera strapped to a tree. It looked dead, its lens cracked. I thought about taking it down, but decided against it. Then I noticed another camera further in, newer this time, blinking red in the dark. I tried to convince myself the rangers had set it up to monitor wildlife. But the red light kept pulsing steady, almost like it was watching me. The wind shifted, carrying a smell I couldn't place, faintly sweet like rotting fruit mixed with copper. My stomach turned. I swung the light around, and that's when I saw the torn fabric caught on a branch, stained dark at the edges. I leaned in. It looked like part of a backpack strap. Nearby, the ground had been disturbed. Something had been dragged through the dirt, leaving long parallel grooves that disappeared into the trees. I told myself it was probably an animal kill, maybe a deer carcass pulled off by coyotes. But when I crouched and brushed the dirt aside, I found something else. A small metal tag, flattened and bent. It was the kind they sell at park gift shops, stamped with a name, Daniel. The missing hiker from the poster had been named Daniel Worth. I remember because I'd glanced at it only hours earlier. The woods around me seemed to tighten then. The silence changed, growing thick and heavy. I could hear something faint behind me, soft footsteps maybe 10 yards back. I swung the light around fast, catching nothing but trees. The steps stopped. I called out, asking if anyone was there. No answer. I started backing up toward the main trail, but the air felt different now, colder still. My flashlight flickered once, then steadied. When I turned forward again, there was someone standing on the path ahead. Too far for me to see clearly, just a pale outline against the dark. I thought it might be another hiker, but they weren't moving. They stood too still, arms hanging stiffly at their sides. I raised the light. The beam hit them full on. A young woman, maybe in her 20s. Her face was blank, eyes glassy, skin chalk white. She wore a torn flannel shirt and mud-streaked jeans. I could see the dark shape of something like a bruise along her throat. I froze, unable to speak. Then she took one step toward me, and the sound of it was wrong. Dry, scraping like bone on stone. I stumbled backward, heart hammering. My light caught the trees again, and when I looked back, she was gone. The woods were empty. I didn't run at first. I just walked fast, keeping my light low. But every few seconds I heard movement beside me in the brush, a faint whisper of feet matching my pace. When I broke into a jog, it sped up. When I stopped, it stopped. The ground felt soft beneath my boots now, like I was walking on layers of leaves that hadn't been there before. By the time I reached the clearing where the sign should have been, it was gone. The tree stood bare, no wood, no nails, just the faint scars where something had been recently torn down. I shone the light around in panic. There were footprints in the dust, mine and another set beside them, smaller, barefoot, leading back toward my camp. I didn't sleep that night. I packed up before sunrise and drove out as soon as there was light. When I stopped at the ranger station to return my parking pass, I asked casually if any of the trails had been reopened recently. The woman behind the counter frowned and said no. They were still the same 8 as always. I told her about the sign, about the path that seemed new. She looked at me for a long moment, then said quietly, "Sir, Trail 9 was closed permanently in 2009. We tore down every marker. If there's one up again, you shouldn't go near it." I left without another word. That was 5 days ago. This morning, when I walked out to my truck, There was something nailed to the fence post by the driveway. A piece of wood, fresh and pale, with deep black letters burned into it. It read Trail 9. The first thing I noticed about the place was how quiet it was. Not peaceful quiet, but that thick, unnatural kind of silence that makes you whisper without knowing why. The gravel crunched under our tires as my wife and I rolled into the campground around 11:30 at night, dead tired from the long drive through the hill country. We'd been on the road since morning, passing small towns and deer warnings and those empty gas stations that look like they've been abandoned for years. We hadn't planned to arrive so late, but every other campsite we'd tried was full, and the one here at Lake Rayburn was listed online as rarely crowded. That description turned out to be half right. As soon as I turned off the engine, I noticed the firelight flickering in the distance. There were maybe 6 or 7 campsites visible through the trees, each with its own little campfire. Some still crackling, others down to red coals. Tents were set up around them, neat and tidy, with chairs pulled close and coolers left open beside picnic tables. At first glance, it looked like a busy night at the campground until I realized no one was moving. No laughter, no talking, no sound of music or crickets even. Just the faint pop of burning wood. Looks like we're not the only ones crazy enough to camp this late, my wife Rachel said with a half smile. I remember how relieved she sounded then. We'd been driving for hours and seeing other campers seemed like a good sign. But when she stepped out and closed her door, the echo of it felt too loud, like it didn't belong there. I got out too, stretched my legs and scanned the area. Every site looked occupied, but nobody was around. There were hot dogs still skewered over some of the fires, cans of beer half drunk on tables. One even had a radio sitting beside the fire pit, the kind with dials and a cracked speaker grill. It wasn't on, but it looked like someone had just been listening to it. We called out a couple of times. Hello? Anyone up? Nothing. Not a voice, not a stir from the tents. The air smelled faintly metallic under the smoke, and I thought maybe there'd been rain earlier. That damp scent that clings to soil and aluminum. I told Rachel to stay close while I checked around, thinking maybe there was some sort of group event that left early, or maybe a ranger doing rounds. I walked to the nearest fire pit, my boots crunching softly over pine needles, and looked inside one of the tents. It was empty. Sleeping bags were unrolled, but no one inside. A lantern still burned dimly near the entrance, its light shivering against the canvas. Inside was a phone charger plugged into a power bank, a bag of marshmallows, and an open paperback face down like someone had set it aside mid-chapter. Something about that, the half-read book, made my chest feel tight. People don't just leave like that. Not with fires burning, not with food cooking. I checked another tent, then another. Same thing. Every site was set up, every fire tended, but there wasn't a single person anywhere. Rachel was standing by the car, hugging herself in the chill. Maybe they went to the lake, she suggested, but I could tell she didn't believe it. The path to the lake was dark and narrow, and even from here I could see that no flashlights or lanterns were moving along it. We decided to stay near the car until morning. The campground felt wrong, but driving back that late on those winding roads wasn't safe. We parked close to the edge of our assigned site and set up our small tent. I remember telling her it was fine, that maybe there'd been a ranger evacuation or something earlier in the evening. I didn't believe that either, but I needed to say it. I tried to make a fire from the nearby pit, but when I knelt down to light the kindling, I saw something strange. The ashes weren't cold, they were warm, almost hot. Someone had been there maybe 20 minutes before we arrived. Rachel didn't want to sleep, and honestly, neither did I. We sat in our camp chairs by the dim glow of our lantern, watching the trees sway in the dark. The silence was heavy, like it pressed down on us. Around 1 in the morning, a faint sound broke it, a soft thump like a tent flap closing. It came from one of the empty sites. Rachel jumped and looked at me. I grabbed the flashlight and swept it across the area, the beam bouncing off reflective tent fabric. Nothing moved. Then another sound, this time from the opposite direction. It wasn't a tent flap, it was footsteps, slow and deliberate, crushing leaves. I shouted again, asking if anyone was there. The light caught nothing but the edges of trees and the smoke drifting low across the ground. I could feel Rachel's hand gripping my arm, her nails digging in. The footsteps stopped, but the feeling that someone was watching didn't. The air had that still wait before a storm, and every sound, our breathing, the crackle of embers, felt too loud. I thought I saw movement near one of the fires farther out, a shadow crossing briefly through the glow, but when I aimed the light, it was gone. Just the shimmer of heat over the flames. We finally decided to get inside the tent, though neither of us lay down. I kept the flashlight in my hand and listened. Around 2, the noises started again, this time closer. It sounded like zippers being pulled open, one after another from the other tents, then the soft rip of fabric tearing. Rachel covered her mouth to keep from gasping. The sound moved slowly through the campground as if someone, or several people, were checking each tent one by one. My heart pounded so loud I thought whoever it was could hear it. Then silence again. Long, cold silence. I must have dozed off sitting up because when I opened my eyes, there was pale light filtering through the tent wall. Dawn. I went outside, stiff and shaky, and almost dropped the flashlight when I saw what was left. Every tent, every single one of them, was collapsed. Poles snapped, fabric shredded. The fires were dead now, nothing but cold ash. The picnic tables were overturned, food scattered like it had been thrown. There were no footprints except ours and a few strange drag marks in the dirt leading toward the woods. Rachel came out behind me, covering her mouth again. I followed the drag marks only a few steps before stopping. Whatever had been pulled that way had left streaks of something dark on the leaves. Mud maybe, but it looked wrong. Thicker somehow. I turned back toward the car and said we were leaving. I didn't even bother packing the tent. I just shoved what I could into the trunk. When we pulled out onto the access road, I glanced back one last time. For a second, I thought I saw someone standing near the tree line, still as stone, watching the car roll away. The figure didn't move or wave, just stood there until the bend in the road took it out of sight. We reached the main highway by mid-morning and stopped at a ranger station a few miles down. The ranger there looked confused when I told him what we'd seen. "That campground's been closed for months," he said. "Storm took out the bridge. You couldn't have gotten in without going past the barriers." I told him there weren't any barriers, that the road was open. He just stared at me for a long time and said, "I'll check it out." That was 3 days ago. Yesterday, I got a call from an unknown number while fueling up. When I answered, all I heard was the crackle of a campfire and the sound of someone breathing slow and steady, like they were standing right beside it. Then a faint voice, low and quiet, barely there, whispered my name before the line went dead. It was just past dawn when Dale Henson pulled off the gravel road and parked his pickup under the shade of a pecan tree. The November air was cold enough that his breath came out in little bursts of fog. He could hear the distant hum of cattle, the occasional crow, and the slow creak of the cooler as he dragged it from the truck bed. He liked hunting alone. Always had. It was quieter that way, easier to listen for the sounds that mattered. The snap of a twig, the rustle of brush, the shuffle of something moving just beyond sight. He'd packed light this time, just 2 rifles, a thermos of coffee, and enough ice to keep whatever he caught through the day. The cooler was old, a big blue igloo with cracked handles, the kind you buy once and keep forever. Dale opened it, poured in the fresh ice from the gas station in Fredericksburg, and watched the frost creep along the plastic edges. The sound of the cubes hitting the bottom was sharp in the morning stillness. Then, just as he reached for the latch to close it, he heard a dull knock from underneath. It was soft, like a fingertip tapping from inside the cooler. He froze, his hand still on the lid. For a moment he thought maybe the plastic was shifting. Maybe a piece of ice settled and hit the bottom. But then it came again, 2 slow, deliberate taps, knock, knock. He stepped back, staring at it. The ice was clean and fresh. He hadn't packed anything else yet. He crouched and lifted the cooler to check underneath. The dirt was dry. Nothing moved. No animal tracks, no sign of life at all. "Must have been the handle," he muttered, setting it back down. But when he stood up and looked out toward the tree line, something about the silence felt wrong. The air had gone still, as if the woods were holding their breath. The distant crows had stopped. Even the cattle sounds were gone. He shook it off, loaded his rifle, and headed into the mesquite thickets. By noon, the sun was sharp and white, and Dale had a small whitetail buck strung up in a low oak near the clearing. He gutted and cleaned it quick, wiped his hands on his jeans, and carried the meat back toward the truck in pieces wrapped in trash bags. When he got there, he dropped the first one into the cooler. The thump of meat on ice echoed in the quiet. He shut the lid and took a long drink of coffee. Then came another knock, this time louder. He whipped his head toward it, heart pounding. The cooler rocked slightly as if something had pushed up from inside. Dale's pulse thudded in his ears. He grabbed the latch and pulled it open. The ice was still there, the meat resting neatly on top. But the water at the bottom wasn't clear anymore. It had turned faintly pink, swirling with something dark. He looked closer. The ice cubes were melting faster than they should have, even for the midday heat. They hissed softly, like someone exhaling under the lid. Dale shut it again and stood there, sweat starting to bead on his neck despite the cool breeze. He told himself it was a trick of the mind. The cooler was old, maybe leaking, maybe the drain plug loose. But later, when he tossed in the second bag, he heard a sound that wasn't ice shifting. It was a voice, faint and wet-sounding, coming from inside. Cold. He stumbled back, nearly tripping over his rifle. His breath came in sharp bursts. The voice had been muffled, but clear enough to hear. He stared at the cooler, every hair on his arm standing on end. He waited, crouched low, listening. Minutes passed. Nothing. He reached for the latch again, fingers trembling, and lifted the lid an inch. A wave of cold air hit his face, thick and heavy like something alive. Inside, buried halfway beneath the melting ice, was a pale shape. It wasn't meat. It was a hand. He slammed it shut, stumbled back, and swore out loud. He circled the truck, half expecting someone to jump out from the trees. But there was no one. No sound except the faint dripping from the cooler drain. He told himself he'd imagined it. Too much sun, not enough sleep. But when he looked down, the drain was open. Pink water was leaking onto the dirt, seeping toward his boots, and mixed in with the meltwater was a small piece of something pale, fingertip-sized. He backed away, shaking. The voice came again, clearer this time, pressed right against the plastic wall. "Let me out." Dale grabbed his rifle, aimed it at the cooler, and shouted for whoever it was to come out. His voice echoed through the trees and came back to him hollow. The cooler didn't move. Finally, he stepped closer and flipped it open all the way. There was nothing inside but ice and meat. The water was clear again. The hand was gone. He stayed still for a long time, then finally exhaled and sat on the tailgate. He didn't eat, didn't drink, just stared at the cooler, waiting for something else to happen. When nothing did, he closed it carefully and decided to head back before dark. As he drove, the cooler shifted slightly in the back of the truck. Each time the tires hit a bump, he thought he heard something inside move with it. Not the clatter of ice, heavier, slower, like something turning over. By the time he reached his cabin near Blanco, the sun was gone. The horizon burned orange and purple and the fields were empty. He parked under the carport and sat in silence for a moment before grabbing the cooler. It was heavier than it had been that morning. He had to drag it inside. The first thing he noticed was the smell. Not blood, not meat, but something else. Damp earth, pond water. He left the cooler by the door and turned on the light. The bulb flickered weakly. He unzipped his jacket, trying to calm his breathing. Then there came a single knock from the cooler. Loud. It echoed through the cabin walls. He stepped forward, staring at it. The latch began to tremble. Ice water trickled from the corner seam, running across the wooden floor. His hand shook as he grabbed the lid and lifted it open in one motion. The inside was filled to the brim with murky water, dark and swirling as if it were deep, far deeper than the cooler could possibly be. And from somewhere below the surface, a pale face looked up at him, eyes open, mouth moving soundlessly. He dropped the lid and stumbled back. The latch snapped shut by itself. The water stopped dripping. The silence returned. He ran outside to the truck, grabbed his flashlight, and came back in. When he opened the door again, the cooler was dry, empty. No ice, no water, no meat. Only a faint residue on the bottom, silt like from the bed of a river. He left it where it was, locked the door, and sat awake the rest of the night with the rifle across his lap. Every few minutes he thought he heard it again, a single dull knock from somewhere inside the cabin. By morning, he'd made up his mind to get rid of it. He hauled it into the bed of his truck, drove to the Pedernales River Bridge, and shoved it over the edge. It hit the water with a heavy splash, floated for a moment, then slowly sank, bubbles rising to the surface. He waited until they stopped before driving home. For a few days, things were quiet. He told himself it was over. But when he went out to hunt again the next weekend, there was something waiting in the bed of his truck. A cooler, blue with cracked handles. When he lifted the lid, the inside was empty. Just a thin layer of frost and a faint smell of wet earth. Then from beneath it came the knock. On the eastern edge of the Texas Hill Country, there's a park called Lost Maples. It's a place people visit in fall when the leaves turn red and gold and the air gets crisp enough to feel like another state. The Sabinal River runs through the canyons, quiet and green, and the limestone cliffs glow orange in the evening light. It looks like a postcard, but there's a strangeness to it when the crowds are gone, when the sun sets early and mist clings to the trees. Locals say the name wasn't just poetic. They say people have actually been lost there. One of them was a woman named Teresa Holt. She came down from Kerrville that November to hike alone. She was 42, a photographer, divorced with a quiet life and an old Subaru that could fit all her camping gear. She told the park ranger she wanted to stay 3 nights, hike the East Trail, and get some sunrise shots near the overlook. The ranger, a man named Rangel, said she signed in at 8:23 that morning. She never signed out. By the second day, another camper saw her on the trail, a woman with a red bandana and camera bag, walking past 2 tall maples that grew so close together, their trunks nearly touched. The man remembered it because he thought the trees looked like gateposts. He said she stopped between them and took a photo. Then she kept walking. When she didn't return, the search started. Rangers, volunteers, dogs, helicopters. They found her tent near the primitive campsite by Can Creek. Her backpack was zipped, her sleeping bag rolled. She had left only her camera and a map. But something about that map bothered the ranger. On it, Teresa had circled 2 trees in pen right where the man said he'd seen her. The circle was dark, pressed hard into the paper like she'd drawn it over and over. The search team went out there. They found the 2 maples easily enough. They weren't remarkable, just tall, gnarled trunks with smooth red bark and deep roots twisting into the limestone. The air there was cooler, quieter. Even the birds didn't seem to cross between them. The rangers called her name. They checked the ground, the creek bed, even the caves farther up. Nothing. After a week, the official story was she got lost off trail, maybe slipped into a crevice or hit her head. But those who helped in the search said something felt off. One of the volunteers, a retired game warden, swore the 2 trees were closer together every day they came back. At first, there had been space for a man to walk between them. Then by the 3rd day, they brushed shoulders against the trunks. On the 5th, the bark edges nearly touched. He joked it was his imagination until he realized there were new gouges in the soil, deep, angled impressions around the roots, like the trees had shifted in the night. Months passed. The case went cold. Then, in early spring, a young couple from Austin went hiking near the same trail. They took photos for Instagram. In one of them, you can see the 2 trees. But if you zoom in, there's a faint shape between them, like a face half lit, the suggestion of a cheek and an eye where there shouldn't be one. When they posted it, a commenter said it looked like the missing woman. The post was deleted a few days later. Ranger Rangel didn't like rumors, but he went out to check anyway. He found the spot easily, though he couldn't remember the trees ever being that close together. The space between them was too narrow now even for a child to squeeze through. He called it in, and another ranger brought an old photo from the first search. When they compared it, the trees had clearly moved. Not by inches, by feet. They fenced off the area for a while, citing erosion, though there was no sign of it. But after a few storms and more tourists asking questions, they took the fence down. Lost maples depended on visitors, after all. I first heard the story from Rangel himself years later, when I was writing a feature on Texas state parks. He had retired by then, living in a little house near Bandera. We sat on his porch drinking coffee, and I asked him which search stayed with him the most. He said Teresa's name without hesitation. Then he told me something he never put in his report. The morning after they found her camp, he had gone alone to the trees before the others arrived. The mist was thick, and he heard dripping water even though it wasn't raining. When he got close, he saw a small piece of white cloth caught in the bark. Part of a sleeve, he thought, though it was smooth like nylon. He reached to pull it free, but it was fused to the wood like the tree had grown around it. The more he tugged, the deeper it seemed to sink in until it was gone. He said he backed away and didn't mention it again. But for months afterward, he'd dream about the woods. In the dreams, he'd be standing between those 2 trunks. The bark would feel soft and warm, and the sound of breathing would come from inside the wood. When he woke, his house would smell faintly of damp leaves. He told me he went back one last time after he retired. The maples were still there, taller now, fused together completely. The bark where they met looked smooth and pale, almost like skin. He touched it and said it felt wrong, warm like something alive under the surface. A year after that, hikers found another map on the same trail, pinned to a post. It wasn't from the park office, just a folded printout with a hand-drawn circle and the words, "Stay away from the trees," written in pencil. Rangers assumed it was a prank, but when the photo of the old map was shown on a local forum, a woman who'd worked in the ranger station swore she recognized the handwriting. It matched the logbook entry Teresa Holt had written the day she arrived. That section of the park is closed again now, though the official reason is trail maintenance. If you walk far enough down the river and look across, you can still see the tops of two red maples leaning together. Visitors say the trunks touch, forming a narrow seam like a scar. Last winter, a hiker camping nearby said he woke in the night to the sound of snapping wood. He swore he saw one of the trees tilt slightly as if making room. When he shined his flashlight, he thought he saw something pale move inside the crack between the trunks, something shaped like a shoulder sliding deeper into the dark. They say the forest there shifts with the seasons, that roots crawl through limestone and trunks twist toward the sun. But when you stand under those trees and see how the bark folds into itself, you can't help but wonder if the woods are still growing around her, inch by inch, year by year, until there's nothing left but the whisper of leaves and the faint sound of a camera shutter clicking somewhere deep inside the maple grove. The trail began just outside of Medina, a narrow path cutting through the cedar-dense hills, the kind that swallowed cell signals and daylight with equal hunger. I had come alone, which wasn't unusual for me. Hiking solo gave me something quiet, something clean that I couldn't find in the noise of everyday life. The only company I expected was the crunch of my boots and the hum of cicadas. But by the second mile, I realized I wasn't the only one walking. It started faintly. Soft steps behind me, perfectly spaced, deliberate, like someone pacing me just out of sight. I stopped. The sound stopped. I took another step. Crunch. And from behind me, a half second later, another crunch. Then a voice. One. It was clear, calm, spoken just loud enough to be heard. I froze. The voice didn't echo. It was too close for that. I turned around. The trail was empty, the trees standing still in the warm October air. I told myself it was some trick of acoustics, maybe a deer stepping in rhythm with me, but deer don't count aloud. I forced a laugh under my breath, shook it off, and started walking again. My boots hit the dirt. Two, the voice said right after. I spun around fast enough to make my pack swing. Still nothing. No wind, no shifting brush, just the dry rattle of leaves. I kept going, faster this time. My heart pounded in time with my steps. 3. I gripped the strap of my pack so hard my knuckles went white. I told myself to turn back, that maybe it wasn't worth finishing the loop today, but some part of me, the stubborn part that didn't like being scared by things I couldn't see, kept moving forward. The trail bent downhill into a shaded ravine, the temperature dropping a good 10 degrees. My skin prickled. My boot scuffed a rock. 4. The voice had moved closer. I could hear the breath in it, dry and steady like someone who'd been walking for a long time. I wanted to say something, to yell maybe or call out a challenge, but my throat locked up. I could taste metal, so I just kept walking. 5. I took a turn sharper than I meant to, breaking into a jog. The cedar trees thinned and sunlight pushed through the branches in white slashes. I thought if I reached the ridge I could see whoever it was, but every time I stopped, everything went dead quiet. I pulled my phone from my pocket. No signal, no bars, nothing but the useless little SOS in the corner. When I lowered it, I caught a glimpse of something between two trees up the hill. A man, or the outline of one, standing too still to be natural. He wasn't moving. But when I blinked, he was gone. I climbed faster. My breath came ragged, each inhale full of dust. I didn't hear footsteps anymore, but I did hear whispering. Soft, counting whispers that seemed to come from every direction at once, overlapping in a rhythm I couldn't quite follow. 6, 7, 8. I tried not to listen. My legs burned as I reached the crest, but I didn't stop until I reached a clearing with a small wooden sign that said, Trail 31, Maintenance Only. I didn't remember seeing it on the map. My plan had been to follow the main loop and cut back toward the trailhead, but somehow, somewhere, I had taken a wrong turn. The counting stopped. I stood there, the silence thick, waiting for something to move, for anything. Then the voice came again right behind me, close enough that I felt its breath on my neck. 9. I turned, swinging my arm like I could grab something, but the air was empty. The trail behind me was perfectly undisturbed. Not a broken twig, not a print. But when I looked down at the dirt near my own boots, I saw 2 sets of tracks, mine and another pair beside them, slightly longer, pressed deep into the soil, like someone heavier had been walking half a step behind me the whole way. My stomach dropped. I stepped back and nearly tripped over something. It was a stick carved with marks, tallies in groups of 10. There must have been 100 of them. The wood was smooth at the handle, worn from being held. The numbers, etched crudely, cut deep enough that the grooves were black with dirt. I didn't pick it up. I turned around and started walking downhill fast, trying to retrace my path. My thoughts raced. Maybe it was some hiker ahead of me, some ranger doing trail work, someone with a strange habit. But the numbers didn't add up, literally. Every time the voice spoke, it was 1 number ahead of my own steps. I counted silently as I went. 10. I lifted my boot. 11. It matched perfectly. Always 1 step, 1 count ahead. I tested it again, walking unevenly, quick, short, slow. The voice adjusted instantly, never missing the pattern. The cadence changed with mine, like it was listening inside my head. 12. My throat tightened. I shouted then, louder than I'd meant to.
Who are you?
The words came back to me in perfect rhythm, mimicked exactly my own voice replying from the trees. Who are you? But 1 beat ahead. The echo hit before I'd even finished speaking. I broke into a run. I don't know how long I ran. The path blurred together. The turns identical, the trees repeating like wallpaper. When I slowed down, gasping for breath, I realized I'd looped back to the same carved stick. Only this time it wasn't alone. There were 3 more, each marked with fresh tallies and something new. Numbers carved directly into the dirt. Long lines stretching out like someone had been kneeling there counting in the soil. I don't know why I didn't just drop everything and bolt into the brush. Maybe I thought staying on the trail was safer. Maybe I was afraid to leave it. But as I stared at the carvings, I noticed something that made my chest seize up. The last number etched in the dirt wasn't random. It matched my steps exactly. Every one I had taken since leaving the trailhead. And beside it, a new number, 1 higher, freshly scratched, still moist at the edges. I spun around. There he was. Not far now. A man in a dark jacket, face shadowed, hands at his sides. I could only see his mouth moving slowly, silently. Counting. His lips shaped the word 1. My ears filled with a rush of sound, like wind moving through a tunnel, but there was no wind. He didn't blink. He just stared, head tilted, and started walking toward me, perfectly in sync with my heartbeat. I turned and ran. The trail twisted, narrowed, vanished into brush, but I didn't care. I cut through it, scraping my arms raw. Behind me, the counting grew louder, overlapping with itself faster now, like a crowd of voices all reciting the same sequence, each a number ahead, racing to the end of something I couldn't see. I broke through the brush and saw the glint of my truck through the trees. I slammed the door behind me, hands shaking so bad I could barely turn the key. When the engine roared to life, I looked in the rearview mirror. There was nothing there, just the empty trail and the soft sway of cedar branches. I drove all the way back to Medina, then another 40 miles to Bandera, not stopping once. When I finally parked outside a diner, I realized my odometer had stopped exactly at the number I'd reached when the counting began. And that number, printed faintly in the dust of my windshield, was 1 higher. I wiped it clean. But when I got home that night, my phone buzzed once on the counter. A text with no contact, no number, no timestamp. Just a single word, 1. A storm had rolled in from the west, low and heavy, dragging its gray belly across the hills like some tired old animal. It was the kind of Texas rain that came without warning. Hot wind first, then thunder, then a sudden wall of water that swallowed everything. The Jacobs family had been driving all afternoon, trying to make it to Kerrville before dark. But when the rain turned into sheets and the wipers couldn't keep up, they pulled off onto a dirt road and found a place to wait it out. Jacobs Creek campground was empty this time of year, just a sloping patch of land along the creek and a few electric hookups. The rain was steady when they parked the RV, but it turned violent not long after. The sound of it hitting the roof drowned out everything else. Mark Jacobs shut off the ignition and sat there for a while, letting the engine tick as it cooled. His wife Claire was in the passenger seat staring out into the dark, and their daughter Emma was curled up on the couch with her tablet, trying to watch something through the weak Wi-Fi. They had all been in better moods earlier in the day, laughing about taking the adventure route through the hill country, but the fun had gone quiet when the rain came. The dirt road they'd turned onto had been rough, and now it was mud. They were stuck here for the night, whether they liked it or not. Mark moved through the narrow space of the RV, checking the windows, making sure they were sealed. The rain hammered against the metal sides like fists. Occasionally, the lightning flashed bright enough to show the trees outside, gnarled oaks leaning over the creek, their limbs tossing like they were trying to shake something loose. Each flash was followed by the echoing boom of thunder that made the walls tremble. The smell of wet earth came in through the small vents, sharp and metallic. They ate in silence, listening to the storm. At first, Mark told himself it was just rain, but sometime after midnight the wind died down and the sound of it changed. The rhythm shifted. It wasn't constant anymore. There were pauses, moments when he could swear he heard something moving outside between the gusts. He muted the small TV they had running off the battery and listened. Claire noticed his stillness and looked at him. "What is it?" she asked. He shook his head. "Nothing. Thought I heard something by the creek." The rain came in bursts now, lighter but colder. Through the window, he could see only the faint glint of water where the creek ran past the edge of the campsite. It was rising fast, swallowing the rocks and grass. He went to the small kitchenette and looked out the window again. That's when he heard it for sure, a low humming sound, soft but steady, weaving through the noise of the rain. It was human, a voice. He thought at first it was Emma, maybe humming to herself, but she was asleep on the couch. The sound was coming from outside, from somewhere near the back of the RV. It was an old tune, slow and tuneless, like the kind of hum a person makes without realizing it. Mark stood still, listening, his pulse climbing. The humming moved, a few steps to the left, a few to the right. Then it stopped. Claire came up behind him. "What are you doing?" He pointed toward the rear window. "Someone's out there." She frowned and peered into the dark, but there was nothing to see, just rain sliding down the glass. Then faintly the humming started again. This time she heard it too. She grabbed his arm. "Mark, it's probably the wind." He wanted to agree, but the sound had rhythm, breath, and pauses. Someone was walking circles around the RV, humming as they went. He turned off the small light over the sink, plunging the RV into near darkness. The storm outside was gray-black now, the lightning farther away. In the dim light from the dashboard, he saw his own reflection in the glass. For a moment he thought he saw another face beside his own, but it vanished when the lightning flashed again. The humming stopped completely. Then came a soft tap against the side panel. Not rain, not branches. A deliberate knock. Claire gasped and pulled Emma's blanket up around her. Mark pressed his ear to the wall and heard the slow scrape of boots through mud. Whoever it was, they were right outside. He thought about stepping out, but the image of the downpour and the blackness beyond the thin walls made him hesitate. He reached into the small cabinet under the sink and pulled out the flashlight they kept there. The batteries were weak, but it worked. He stood by the door and waited. The humming started again, closer this time, just beneath the window by Emma's couch. He flicked on the light and pointed it out the window. Nothing, just rain bouncing off the ground. Then something brushed against the side of the RV. A wet shape, maybe a coat or an arm. He saw it for a second, pale and moving. He caught his breath and froze. Claire whispered from behind him, "Is it an animal?" He didn't answer. He turned the light off again, hoping to catch it by surprise if it came back. A few seconds passed, then another knock, this time on the door itself. A slow, heavy rap that made the handle rattle. "Who's there?" Mark called out, no answer. Only the humming, now coming from the other side. Circling again, he waited for it to stop before cracking open the blinds on the door's small window. Through the distortion of the rain, he saw a figure standing just at the edge of the light from the RV's exterior lamp. A tall shape in soaked clothes, head tilted slightly as if listening. The face was shadowed. The figure took a step back, then turned and disappeared into the trees. Mark locked the door, heart pounding. "Someone's out there," he said again, louder this time. Claire clutched Emma close, whispering that it would be okay. An hour passed. The rain didn't stop, but the sound of it softened to a steady drumming. Mark sat awake in the front seat, flashlight in hand, watching the windows. Each time he thought he heard movement, it faded away before he could be sure. He began to wonder if exhaustion was playing tricks on him. The humming hadn't come back. Maybe whoever it was had gone when the rain eased up. But around 3 in the morning, Emma stirred. She sat up, eyes glassy with sleep, and asked, "Daddy, who's singing outside?" The words hit him like a jolt. He jumped up and looked toward the back window again. The humming had returned, clearer now, right beside the wall where Emma's head had been. It was the same low, steady tune, the same rhythm as before. He couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed his raincoat, slipped on his boots, and told Claire to stay inside and lock the door. She protested, but he was already opening it. The cold hit him like a slap. The rain was steady, falling through mist that clung low over the creek. He stepped down into the mud, the beam of his flashlight cutting through sheets of water. The humming stopped the second his feet hit the ground. He turned in a full circle, scanning the dark. Nothing but trees and water. Then faintly he saw footprints, bare ones, circling the RV in the mud. Not fresh, but not washed away either. He followed them toward the edge of the creek where the ground turned soft. The tracks ended at the water. Lightning flashed, and for an instant he saw someone standing halfway across the creek, facing him. A tall man, motionless, arms hanging by his sides. His face was pale in the light, his mouth open. The hum began again, but this time it came from everywhere, vibrating in the air, coming from the water itself. Mark stumbled back, nearly falling, and ran for the RV. When he slammed the door behind him, Claire was crying. The humming faded slowly until it was gone. They didn't sleep after that. When the rain finally stopped near dawn, they packed up and drove out without speaking. The dirt road had half flooded, but the truck's tires managed to pull through. As they passed the sign for Jacob's Creek, Mark looked out the window one last time. There was a man standing near the trees, half hidden by the mist, humming softly as they drove past. He didn't move or wave, just watched them go. That night, when Mark stopped for gas outside of Bandera, he stepped out and noticed the sound again. Very faint, somewhere behind the gas station, threading through the drip of water from the roof. The same slow, wordless tune. He told himself it was just the wind moving through the signs. But even as he climbed back into the RV, he could feel it inside him, low and steady, like something that had followed them out of the storm and wasn't finished yet. It started as a quiet weekend. My wife Allison had booked a campsite up near Palo Duro Canyon. Far from the highway noise, far from cell service. Just us and our 9-year-old son, Ben. The plan was simple. Cook over a fire, tell stories, let the boy see stars that weren't dimmed by city lights. We drove out Friday afternoon. The sky stretched wide and pink over the plains. That strange, endless Texas horizon that makes you feel small. The ranger at the gate handed me a paper map, told me coyotes were active lately and to keep food sealed. His warning didn't worry me. I'd heard coyotes plenty growing up in West Texas. Their yips and laughter were background music to the night. We set up camp as the sun went down, near a line of red cliffs that caught the last light. The air was still warm, but the wind that swept down from the canyon had a dry, restless edge. Allison got the fire going while I unfolded the tent. Ben was tossing rocks into the brush, making sound effects for each one. When he froze and pointed, "Dad," he said, "did you hear that?" I paused, waiting, and then it came. A long, drawn-out howl from somewhere in the distance. I smiled. "Just coyotes," I said, but something in the sound prickled at me. It wasn't wild. It was too even, too perfect. Each note seemed placed like someone imitating what they thought a coyote should sound like. We ate dinner anyway. Beans and sausages and cornbread heated in foil. When the night deepened, the canyon went black and the fire was the only thing that felt alive. Then the howls started again, closer this time. They rose in patterns, overlapping, circling, not random like animals calling, but deliberate, spaced apart as if someone, or several someones, were answering each other. Allison looked at me, trying to read if it was normal. I shrugged, pretending not to care, but every sound sent a twinge through my chest. Coyotes never mimicked the same note twice with such precision. These did. I counted 3 distinct voices, all identical in tone, echoing from different sides of the camp. Ben asked if they were saying something. I told him no, but when the wind shifted, I swore I could hear syllables buried in those cries like words stretched into howls. We packed away the food, double-bagged it, zipped the tent. I sat by the fire a while longer with a flashlight and a can of beer, listening. The calls came again, always in threes, one after the other, then silence. I decided it had to be some campers messing around, maybe someone playing a prank or recording through a speaker. But when I killed the fire and stepped toward the trees with my light, the sound came from right beyond the beam's edge. Sharp and sudden. Ooh! My skin went cold. The pitch wasn't moving through the air. It was coming from one spot, fixed and human-shaped. I went back to the tent, unzipped it quietly, and slid inside. Allison was awake, eyes wide. "They sound close," she whispered. I nodded, reaching for the hatchet I'd left near the cooler. The night stretched out, wind sliding through the branches, carrying little whispers that weren't quite words. At some point I fell asleep sitting up, hatchet still in my hand. Around 2, I woke to the sound of something walking between our tent and the dying fire. The steps were soft, deliberate, like bare feet pressing into the dirt. Then the howls started again. Not distant now, but all around us, circling, overlapping until they almost made words. Ben stirred and mumbled, "Dad, they're talking." I hushed him, heart pounding so hard it felt like it shook the air. Then came the worst part. Between the rising calls, I heard my name. "Dan!" The way it drew out, half whispered, half sung, made my chest seize. Allison heard it too. I saw her mouth form the word Dan in disbelief. She clutched Ben close and I crawled to the zipper, careful not to make a sound. The fire had gone out completely. The moon was veiled behind clouds, giving everything that gray-blue color of half-dream. I shone my flashlight once, quick and low. What I saw was worse than eyes. A figure stood about 30 feet away, facing us. Not moving, not breathing hard, just still. The beam caught its face for half a second, enough to see it was an animal at all. A person, maybe male, skin dusted with ash or dirt, mouth open wide like it was mid-howl. But when I aimed the light higher, the eyes reflected back wrong, flat and white, no shine. I yanked the zipper closed, whispering, "Stay quiet. Don't move." The next sound came from the other side of the tent. Another voice, same howl, same human pitch, and then another behind us. 3 in total, surrounding the tent. They didn't touch the fabric or step closer. They just mimicked the sound of coyotes again and again until it felt like the noise was inside my skull. Then silence, deep and absolute. Morning came gray and empty. The fire pit was cold, and the ground around our site was smooth like someone had brushed away footprints. I told Allison we were leaving early. We packed fast, and when I bent to roll the tent, something caught my eye. A small pile of bones near the tree line. Not animal bones. Small, thin, arranged in a circle, each one carved with little notches like tally marks. I kicked dirt over them and didn't tell my family. We drove to the ranger station without speaking. When I handed over the campsite tag, the ranger squinted at the number. "You were at Site 17? I nodded, his jaw tightened. "That one's supposed to be closed," he said. "You must have gotten an old map." I told him what we heard. His eyes drifted to the window where the wind pushed dry leaves across the lot. "Coyotes do strange things out there," he said finally, voice low. "Sometimes they learn to mimic. But if you hear one that sounds too human, don't answer it. It's not them calling back." I wanted to press to ask what he meant, but the look on his face told me not to. We drove home in silence, the radio off. That night, as I unloaded the cooler, I heard something faint through the trees behind our house. A long, slow howl. Not from far away this time, not faint or distorted. It carried the same cadence, the same exact pitch as before. And halfway through, clear as if someone were standing at the fence, it bent and shaped itself into my name. The bridge had never been there before that night. That's what made it so strange. The way it seemed to rise from the fog like something called up, not built. The Blanco River was low that summer, but it still moved with a quiet persistence beneath the cliffs west of Wimberley, carving through the limestone and whispering under the cottonwoods. When the campers found it, 4 college friends from Austin who'd come for a weekend of beer and fishing, they thought it was some restoration project, maybe a historical rebuild of the old county bridge that had been washed away in the flood of 2015. They didn't know it had never been rebuilt at all. They arrived at dusk, their headlights sliding over gravel and dust until the road ended in a small clearing by the riverbank. It was familiar country, the kind that makes you feel like the night isn't watching yet. Ben, the oldest of the group, had been here as a kid. He remembered the flood stories, how people used to come to that bridge just to hear the current groan underneath it during storms. He told the others about the night the river rose 15 feet in an hour, how the bridge had been torn free, swept downstream with 3 cars still on it. They laughed in the way people laugh when they don't really believe what you're saying but want to keep the mood light. The sky was a dark pale violet when they saw the bridge. It stood across the bend, a single arch of concrete and rusted iron railings glinting faintly in the fading light. It looked aged, worn, and impossibly intact. "That can't be it," said Lisa, squinting through the windshield. "They said it collapsed, right?" Ben leaned forward. "It did. My dad showed me pictures when I was a kid. It's gone, but it wasn't gone. It was right there." They parked near the tree line and hauled out their coolers and tents, setting up camp beside the old ranger's sign warning about flash floods. The air smelled of cedar and wet stone. By the time the fire was going, the moon had risen, low and orange, and its reflection shimmered across the dark ribbon of the river. The bridge loomed above that light, ghostly and still. Around the fire, they drank and joked and argued about who would dare walk across it first. Ben said they should stay put, that if it was some local construction project, it could be unsafe. Tyler, the loud one, said he'd do it just to prove it wasn't haunted. He grabbed a flashlight and started toward the bridge while the others called after him. The gravel crunched under his boots. His beam of light swung lazily ahead, catching the railing, the faded yellow lines down the center, the surface glistening like it had rained there even though the ground at camp was dry. Halfway across, Tyler turned and shouted something back, but the wind carried it away. Then his light began to flicker. Ben stood uneasy. "Hey, you good?" Tyler waved and kept walking until his figure became a small silhouette against the far side. He stopped there, looking down into the river below. Then he was gone. Lisa screamed his name, but no answer came. The flashlight rolled, still glowing, halfway back toward them as if someone had dropped it and it had spun across the concrete. Ben and Jenna ran forward, stopping just short of the bridge's entrance. It looked solid, more solid than anything man-made should look under moonlight. The railings were covered in lichen, and carved into the nearest support beam were dozens of initials. Dates going back to the 60s, maybe further. Ben brushed his hand over them and felt the grooves sink deeper than they should have.
"Tyler?"
He called again, his voice echoing oddly. The echo didn't fade properly. It came back sharper, quicker, like someone had spoken it back. "Tyler," it repeated faintly. Jenna gasped and grabbed his arm. "We should go," she said. "Now." When they returned to camp, the fire had nearly gone out. Lisa was shaking, staring at the bridge. "I saw him," she whispered. "He was on the other side. He waved at me. But his arm, it wasn't right. Like it bent the wrong way." Ben looked, but there was no one there now. The far end of the bridge was swallowed in mist. They spent the next hour arguing about what to do. Ben wanted to drive out, but the only road led across the riverbed and the dirt had softened with dew. The air grew colder, heavy with that strange stillness that comes before rain. Every so often they thought they heard footsteps crunching near the river, soft and deliberate, moving just beyond the reach of the firelight. Then faintly they heard Tyler's voice. It came from the direction of the bridge, low and urgent. "Guys, come here. You need to see this." Lisa bolted up, but Ben caught her arm. "That's not him," he said quietly. She struggled, whispering, "It sounds like him." The voice called again, closer this time. "It's safe now. Come on." The flashlight by the bridge flickered to life again, though no one had touched it. Its beam pointed straight toward camp, steady and white. The mist thickened, rolling along the river like breath. Ben could see shapes forming in it, figures standing in a faint line on the bridge, motionless as if waiting for something. One of them was tall like Tyler, but the others were older, dressed in clothes that seemed wrong for the time. Flannel shirts, skirts, wide hats. A man in a uniform that might have been a sheriff's. Ben's throat tightened. "Get in the truck," he said. But the engine wouldn't turn. It groaned once and went silent. Jenna cried softly while Lisa kept staring at the bridge, whispering that she could see Tyler smiling. The mist reached the campfire then, curling around the logs, and the flames dimmed. The night sounds, crickets, frogs, wind, fell away all at once. The silence was so complete it hummed. When Ben turned back toward the river, the bridge was closer. Not just visually, it was physically closer. The bend of the river had shortened somehow, the water pulling back as if giving way. The arch now spanned only a few yards from where they stood, and the figures were clearer. He could see their faces now, pale and slack, eyes open but empty. One of them stepped forward. It was Tyler. He looked soaked, his shirt clinging to his chest, his mouth trembling like he was trying to speak. "You said you'd follow," he said quietly, though his lips barely moved. Behind him, the others began to move too, stepping in rhythm, slow and steady, the way people wade through deep water. Ben grabbed Lisa and Jenna and pulled them toward the trees, but the ground there had turned soft, sucking at their boots like mud even though the rain hadn't started. The flashlight beam swung toward them again, cutting through the mist like a command. The bridge's surface gleamed wetly now, reflecting moonlight and waves. Then came the sound, a deep dragging noise like metal being pulled across stone. The bridge shifted. The supports groaned. The figures on it began to hum, a low, mournful sound that grew louder until it matched the rush of the river. Ben stumbled and looked back just as the arch began to crack, fissures spreading like veins. Tyler's figure stood perfectly still as the rest began to sink, one by one, into the mist below. Their humming never stopped. The bridge broke in half with a sound like a roar. The mist exploded upward, swallowing everything in a gray curtain. Ben felt himself thrown backward, hitting the ground hard enough to knock the breath from his lungs. He reached for Lisa's hand but grasped only air. The hum stopped. When he woke, dawn had come. The fire pit was cold, the ground dry again. The river flowed calmly, its surface smooth and quiet. There was no bridge, only the faint impression of two old pylons jutting from the water, half crumbled and covered in moss. Of the others, there was no trace. Their tents were gone, their coolers, even the tracks of their boots. Only Ben's truck remained, keys still in the ignition. He walked to the edge of the river and stared at the place where the bridge had been. The water was clear enough to see the stones below, and the faint glint of something metallic deep under the current, like rebar or railing. He told the sheriff later what had happened, though they found nothing. The ranger said floods sometimes changed the course of the river overnight, that maybe the bridge had always been there in some way, under the silt, waiting to surface. But Ben never went back. Sometimes when the Blanco rises after a heavy rain, locals say you can see the outline of that bridge shimmer across the water for just a few minutes before dawn. And if you listen carefully, beneath the rush of the current, you can hear the faint hum of voices calling to anyone who stops to look. 4 of them thought it was funny at first. They were camping off a narrow back road outside Bandera, one of those rocky pull-offs near a dry creek bed that fills only when storms roll through the hill country. They were college friends, 2 couples who'd driven down from San Marcos for the long weekend. Their cooler packed tight with Lone Stars, ice, and a dozen things they didn't really need. The big blue Coleman sat between their folding chairs, sweating under the early evening heat. It was Emma who first said it whispered. She'd been half dozing in her chair, the fire crackling low, cicadas whining in the brush. "Hey," she murmured, lifting her head. "Did y'all hear that?" No one had, or so they said. Mark kicked at the cooler with his boot and laughed. "Yeah, it's saying drink more beer." But later, when the stars came out and the fire burned lower, Emma stopped laughing. She leaned in close to it, her face flickering orange in the light. "It's saying something, I swear to God." The others told her she was drunk, that the wind in the trees carried strange sounds out there. But the wind had died hours ago. There was only the crackle of the fire and the occasional snap from the dark brush. Then came the whisper again, soft, drawn out, and distinct. It wasn't just a breeze through plastic. It was words. 2 syllables. Drawn slow. "Help me." They all froze. Taylor, the quiet one, set her can down. "Mark, tell me that was you." I didn't say a damn thing. They gathered close, flashlights sweeping the trees, the dry creek bed, the empty highway beyond the mesquite line. The night was still, heavy. They unlatched the lid. Inside was nothing but beer and melting ice. No bugs, no frogs, no hidden prank. Emma grabbed the flashlight and shone it straight into the slush. It came from here. Mark ran his hand along the inside as if feeling for some hole or speaker, something mechanical. "Probably air pressure," he muttered. "You close it too fast, it'll hiss." But when he shut it again, the whisper came quicker from inside, unmistakable and clearer this time. "Let me out." It was Emma's voice. She staggered backward, her own recorded tone curling up from the box like breath. Taylor screamed. Derek kicked the cooler, sending a spray of ice and water into the dirt. The lid slammed shut again, but the whisper didn't stop. It rolled beneath the plastic, muffled but urgent, a chorus of hushed pleading overlapping until it became a single frantic rhythm of voices. All of them. Emma's, Mark's, Taylor's, Derek's. The same voices echoing from inside. They dragged it to the creek bed, their hearts hammering, and Mark flipped it open again. The light caught something slick at the bottom. Not ice, but pale skin under the water, a hand pressed against the inside wall. Only for a second, then gone as the water rippled. Taylor threw up in the dirt. "It's a trick," Mark insisted. "Reflection or something in the water." But when Emma looked down, she saw her own reflection shift, her mouth moving though she wasn't speaking, whispering silently from the mirrored surface of the ice. "Help me." They ran then, leaving the cooler by the fire. It was a 20-minute climb up to the truck, their flashlights jerking through cedar and rock, branches clawing at their clothes. The truck refused to start the first time, then finally coughed to life. When they pulled onto the road, the radio came on without them touching it. A woman's voice, faint beneath the static, said, "Don't leave me here." Emma reached to shut it off, her hand shaking. The knob wouldn't turn. The voice grew louder, clearer, until it wasn't the radio at all. It was coming from the back seat. The cooler sat upright there, dripping onto the upholstery, though none of them had brought it. Derek slammed on the brakes, tires screaming against gravel. He and Mark jumped out, yanked the doors open, and dragged it onto the road. Ice scattered. The lid flopped open by itself. Inside, a single breath exhaled like cold fog. "You left me," it said. Then silence. Mark hit it with the tire iron until the plastic cracked, until the blue shell caved inward. But when he stepped back, the pieces still whispered faintly in the dirt. The sound like voices through cupped hands. They drove the rest of the night without speaking, back toward town. By morning, they stopped at a gas station near Medina. Emma went inside for water. The clerk looked up at her, pale and stiff. "You folks camping out by the creek?" She nodded, too tired to lie. "There's been trouble there," he said. "Couple years back, college kids drowned. Flash flood took their truck and all their gear. They found one of them still in the cooler box downstream, like she'd tried to climb inside." Emma stared at him. "What did you just say?" The clerk frowned. "They never did find the others." When she got back to the truck, Mark and Taylor were gone. Only Derek sat behind the wheel, staring ahead, lips moving silently. She climbed in beside him. "Where'd they go?" Derek didn't answer. She turned to him, ready to shake him, and froze. His lips were whispering her name, but the sound wasn't coming from his mouth. It was coming from the cooler on his lap. The old picnic area wasn't on the new park map, but you could still find it if you followed the cracked service road past the ranger station and took the turn that disappeared into the pines. The park called it Camp Westview back in the 1970s before they built the new campground by the lake. Now it was just a forgotten patch of clearing behind a locked gate that never really stayed locked. We were the kind of people who went looking for places like that. The sun was low when we rolled in. Me, my girlfriend Clara, and our friend Joel in his dented Tacoma. We were camping for the weekend at the new site by the water, but Joel had heard about the old picnic area from one of the rangers, an older guy named Harlan who'd been around forever. He told us not to bother, said there was nothing left but busted stone tables and raccoon dens, but he also said something that stuck with me. He said, "You'll know it when you see it." They never did clear the place after what happened. We thought it was just one of those weird old man comments, but curiosity got the better of us. The trail was half-eaten by weeds, the asphalt breaking apart into dusty chunks. By the time we reached the clearing, it felt like we'd crossed into another time. The trees opened into a wide circle of flat ground. The grass burnt yellow and patchy. There were about 10 stone tables, massive things built from limestone slabs, and all of them were covered in moss. But what froze us wasn't the tables themselves. It was what was on them. Plates, cups, utensils, paper napkins faded to pale ghosts of color, rusted soda cans and a sheet cake collapsed into a sugary fossil. Balloons, gray, shriveled things, still tied to the table legs, swaying slightly in the breeze. It looked like someone had set up a ranger's retirement party 40 years ago and walked away before lighting the candles. Clara whispered, "That's impossible." Joel walked up and brushed his hand along one of the plates. It disintegrated under his fingers like dust. He looked at me uneasy. "It's all still here, like they left 5 minutes ago." I told him it was probably just a leftover display for some ranger event that got canceled, but even as I said it, I felt something wrong about the air. It smelled faintly sweet, like old cake frosting mixed with damp pine. The breeze that passed through the clearing was colder than the air outside it, as if it came from somewhere deep underground. We decided to set up a small fire near the center, just to stay a while. Joel wanted to take photos. Clara sat at one of the tables and ran her finger around the rim of a cracked cup. "Retirement party for Ranger E.W. Madsen," the banner said. The letters were still there, though faded and brittle. The strangest part was the date, June 14th, 1981. "That's over 40 years ago," she said. I nodded. "Maybe they did it up here and forgot to clean it after?" Joel laughed, trying to break the tension. "Yeah, sure, they just left a whole cake and walked off." But none of us were really laughing. The deeper the sun sank, the quieter the woods became. The kind of silence that makes you feel like sound itself is being held back. Not far away, a twig snapped. Clara turned, her eyes wide. I shined my flashlight toward the trees. Nothing. Just shadows between the trunks swaying like they had weight. We packed up fast, but as we started back toward the truck, I realized something strange. The road was gone. The narrow path we came in on just seemed to vanish into thick brush. Joel swore it was the same spot we'd driven in through, but no matter which direction we turned, the trees had closed in. It was as if the forest had rearranged itself. "Let's just stay till morning," Clara said quietly. "Maybe it'll be easier to find the trail when it's light." We didn't argue. We built a small fire, but it burned with a strange hiss, as if the wood was wet. The light threw weird colors onto the tables, yellowish tones that made the plates and cups gleam like bone. I remember feeling watched, not like something was nearby, but like something was in the clearing itself, watching us through the memory of that party. Joel pulled out his phone and played one of the old Ranger interview clips he'd saved from a local archive. It was Harlan again, talking about the park's early years. Halfway through, he mentioned the name Madsen. He was supposed to retire that summer, Harlan said. Whole team threw a party at the old picnic area. Storm came in sudden. When it cleared, the tables were there, but nobody else was. No footprints, no cars, nothing. Joel stopped the video. "That's the same guy," he said. I tried to rationalize it. Said it was probably a campfire story, but the fire sputtered out just then as if the wind had sucked it dry. Total darkness dropped like a curtain. Clara grabbed my arm. I could barely see her face in the glow from Joel's phone. The trees were gone. That's what made my stomach twist. The clearing seemed wider now, emptier. I could see further than before, but it was like the world had hollowed out around us. Something moved at the far edge, small at first, like someone walking between the trees. I thought it was an animal until I heard the clink of metal utensils. Then the soft scrape of a chair leg. Joel whispered, "Do you hear that?" Another scrape. Then a laugh, faint but human. I turned my flashlight toward the nearest table. The plates were full. Not dust anymore, but food, fresh food. A slice of cake with perfect white frosting, a cup of red punch sweating condensation, and on the bench beside it an old ranger's hat. Clara started crying. Joel stepped backward, tripping over the fire pit. The flame flickered back to life for a split second, and in that light we saw them. Figures sitting at the tables. 10 of them, maybe more. Their uniforms were gray-green, their badges dull. They weren't solid, not exactly. They shimmered like heat over asphalt. And every one of them was staring at us. The one at the head table lifted his hand, slow and deliberate. He looked just like the photo of Madsen we'd seen online. His mouth opened, and I swear I heard him say, "You're late." The fire went out again. The next thing I remember is running. My legs moved before my brain caught up. Branches tore at my jacket as I crashed through the brush. Behind me, I heard the clatter of metal, like the tables were being overturned, and voices, low, murmuring voices calling our names. Clara fell once. I pulled her up. Joel was right behind us until he wasn't. 1 second his flashlight was bouncing through the dark, the next it was gone. We broke out of the woods at dawn. Somehow we were back near the ranger station. The air smelled of rain, though the ground was dry. A park truck was parked by the gate, and Harlan was standing beside it, arms crossed. He didn't look surprised to see us. He said, "Told you not to go there." Clara asked him what that place was. Her voice shook so badly she could barely get the words out. Harlan stared past us toward the trees. That party was for Madsen. Storm came through that day. Lightning hit the ridge and started a fire. They say he went back to grab some paperwork. Never made it out. The rest of them tried to find him, but the smoke rolled in fast. They shut the area down after. I asked him why the tables were still set. He shook his head. They clear them every few years, but every time the stuff comes back, same as it was. Some things don't want to be forgotten. We didn't go back to camp. We drove straight out of the park and didn't stop until we hit the highway. Joel didn't answer his phone all morning, but around noon he texted just one word: home. That was enough for us. A week later, a story came up on local news about a hiker who'd gone missing near the old service road. They said they found his truck abandoned by the gate, keys still in the ignition. No footprints, no sign of struggle, just a camera on the passenger seat. The last photo showed a picnic table covered in clean white plates. And standing behind it, a ranger in an old uniform smiling for the picture. When I looked closer, I saw that his name tag was Joel's. I missed the turn because the map on my phone kept reorienting every time the truck bounced over a rut. The service bars had dropped to 1, then to the empty icon you can tap a dozen times without changing anything. Beyond the windshield, the lost pines pressed in with a tightness I could feel in my chest. The loblolly trunks formed a picket fence of black, and behind them the understory of yaupon and shin oak swallowed whatever evening light was left. I told myself I was only a few miles east of Bastrop and the highway would reveal itself if I kept the wheels pointed west. The forest does that to you. It reminds you there are places on the Texas map where the roads kink into each other like thrown string, and your confidence is just another sound for something else to eat. I had come to hike a loop trail I found in an old pamphlet, a civilian conservation corps route that climbed a ridge to an old ranger tower, then snaked down along a creek cut with limestone weirs. The pamphlet had a photo stuck in the corner of a man with suspenders and a brim hat, squinting from the tower platform like he could see the Gulf if the day was clear enough. It was meant to be a Saturday morning thing, a way to stretch my legs after a week of desk work in Austin. It was not supposed to become a night walk, and it was never supposed to become a story I would need to say out loud to convince myself it happened. When the track narrowed and the pine needles thickened under my boots, I killed the engine and let the quiet expand until I could hear the subtle ticks of the truck cooling. No wind, no highway hum. The last color bled from the sky and the canopy trapped what remained. I pulled on my pack and clicked my headlamp to low. Light bulged out against the trees and died immediately as if the bark were velvet. The trail was a suggestion more than a path, but I found the CCC blazes on a couple of old trunks and followed them. The pamphlet had said 4 miles round trip. I figured that even in bad light I could be back at the truck in under 2 hours. That optimism lasted as long as it took the blazes to vanish. The forest floor tipped down and the soil became sandier. It crunched with dry plant matter. I told myself I had stepped onto a side drainage and all I had to do was angle up until I hit the ridge. The trick in a forest like that is to keep your head working while your body sweats. I counted steps. I checked the compass. East was behind me. West was in front. I kept walking. Then the light shifted. At first, I thought it was a reflection from my headlamp on the edge of my glasses. A tiny flare, almost like a misfire. Then there were 2 of them, no bigger than a pea, winking from the brush line on my right. Fireflies are not rare in that part of Texas. On certain May nights, the edges of fields glitter like someone scattered broken glass. But this was late September, and these were bright in a way that felt immediate, almost intrusive. They pulsed once, twice, 3 times, then drifted ahead as if carried by a slow tide. I stopped and pressed my fingertips to the strap of my pack, feeling for the familiar reassurance of webbing and buckles. The lights paused as well, hovering at the same height as my mouth. I took a step. They retreated a step. My throat went dry. There is a childish part of the brain that wants to chase lights in the dark, a part I thought grown out of with summer camp. I made a small circle with my beam and the brush seemed ordinary. Yaupon leaves, the crosshatch of longleaf needles. Nothing else. When I turned the lamp back to where the lights had been, 3 more had joined them. A staggered chain skipping into the trees like breadcrumbs. I told myself someone had hung reflective survey markers. I told myself those markers would lead back to the main trail. I followed. The ground grew springy underfoot with layers of old needles soaked in seasonal rain. I smelled iron and damp wood. The hill I had convinced myself would take me up to the ridge never arrived. Instead, the path dipped into a shallow bowl where the trees were thinner, and the night felt like it had been ladled thicker. The lights gathered at the far end, bright coins laid on the curves of ferns and low branches. They did not blink like normal lightning bugs. They shone steadily, then just when my gaze held them, they dimmed and returned twice as intense. I thought about turning back. I even spun a quarter turn and lifted the beam, but the forest behind me was an unbroken wall. Then a distant shape rose above the black trees to the south, and the lights aimed themselves toward it like deliberate hands. The tower looked wrong against the stars. The old CCC towers are simple things. A central spine of steel, cross braces, a stair caged in mesh, a small shack on top where a person could sit with a thermos and a radio and watch for smoke. This one had a lean, as if the earth had shifted under two legs and the others had followed, unwilling to leave the structure but unable to keep it straight. Its silhouette moved with the barest breath of night like a tall grass stem. The closer I came, the more my stomach planned for a fall. The lights nudged me toward the base and then arranged themselves in a ring around the entrance. I could see it clearly now. They were not insects. They were something else entirely. Little glassy beads about the size of table grapes, each one full of a milky current that rolled like a tide pool under moonlight. When they drifted, they made no sound. When they stopped, the entire clearing breathed a fraction lighter, as if whatever held its lungs tight in the trees loosened an inch. The sign at the base of the tower was bent, Ranger Tower 5. The font was old enough to be charming in the daylight. In the headlamp, it looked doe-eyed and foolish. Someone had posted a warning below with a modern black border. No access, structural hazard. The bottom half of the sign had been gouged in a handful of diagonal slashes that had dulled with rust. Beyond it, the stair rose in narrow, steep angles. The mesh cage around it seemed intact from where I stood. I am not a thrill chaser. I am a person who once turned back on a ladder because the second rung felt loose. I do not climb towers at night to see what a ranger 100 years ago might have seen. Yet the lights pressed close and I stepped onto the first tread anyway. The metal hummed against the soles of my boots. Somewhere below, a night animal moved through brush with deliberate confidence. The lights drifted into the cage with me and stationed themselves along the stairwell in perfect intervals. Their glow gave the metal a pale bloom. My beam became unnecessary and I clicked it off. The moon had not yet pulled itself free of cloud, and without the lamp the sky seemed deeper, a true void. The forest floor below the staircase vanished. Even if I had wanted to head down, the lights told me to go up. I did. There is a rhythm to an old staircase that you can enter if you listen. The treads sag a hair in the middle, then return with a tiny flex. The landings have a tilt, and each one shifts your balance toward the outside. The mesh is fine and powdery with corrosion. The air inside the cage feels used. I passed the second landing and a sound threaded through the hum of insects that I would have called wind if there had been any. It was the sound of someone speaking into their collar. Low and close to the microphone, the consonants rubbed down to wet shapes. I froze with my hand on a railing bolt rough with paint globes and waited. The sound stopped. The lights brightened. At the third landing, I found the first sign that I was not the only idiot to ignore the warning. An aluminum can was flattened against a tread where someone's heel had done the final work. A bright curve of foil glinted from under a stair. It looked like the tear strip from an energy gel. A recent plastic water bottle sat at an angle against the mesh. The condensation dried to a frost of dust. I told myself this meant the tower had held for them. It would hold for me. The platform at the top had boards that had darkened to a bitter gray. The shack on the far end had 3 windows facing inland and a door with a square of glass above the handle. Something moved behind the window, and I nearly sat down without meaning to. It was not a person. It was not a reflection. It had the weight of intention, and it did not retreat. The lights drifted around me, then slid toward the door in a careful line like attendants showing a guest to a throne. You will think I was compelled. That is too mystical for what happened. I was curious the way you are curious about the pain you know you will feel when you press a bruise. I reached the door and set my palm against it. The wood was cool. The glass showed me my face and the lights behind me in a circle. In the glass, the lights were a different color, not milky but amber, as if the world inside the reflection had its own rules. I tried the handle and the door gave easily, swinging inward on quiet hinges. Dust swam in the light like lazy fish. The shack smelled of old paper and metal filings. A chair sat near the middle, its back to the door. Beyond it, a wooden map table had a map pinned under glass with pushpins the color of peppercorns. Another chair leaned against the wall, one leg missing. A portable radio sat on a shelf with the cord coiled around it like an animal's tail. An enamel mug rested where someone had left it without washing. The rim had a thin brown film like tea dried on a hotel saucer. It was all staged too neatly, as if placed for me. The lights flowed in and stationed themselves around the perimeter. The shape in the window turned a degree, and the hair on my arms prickled. There are details you only notice when you are alone in a place nobody has said your name in for years. The chair had the shallow hollows of long use, the wood polished where hands reached and turned. There was a groove along the map table where someone had worried a knife edge into softness. The mug had a chip at the lip large enough to cut a careless drinker. The shelf smelled faintly of tobacco. The little radio had a dab of white paint on its antenna tip like a nail hurriedly finished. Whoever had once sat here had done it for so long the room had taken on their shape. That is what I told myself right before the radio clicked. The sound was sharp and specific. The power cord was wrapped tight. There was no battery compartment. The lights flickered and steadied. The radio clicked again, a patient single tick like a metronome testing the air. Then it spoke. It was not words. Not at first. It was a softness that might have been a throat clearing. Then syllables pulled themselves together and became something like a roll call. The voice was low and not gendered. It said numbers that could have been dates or coordinates. It said Tower 5 and then said my first name as if reading it from a list. My jaw tightened. I had not told anyone where I was going. I had not filed a trail plan. I had left my roommate a lazy note that said Lost Pines, back before dark. The voice said my last name and then, with the care of a person lifting a porcelain lid, it said the name of the small town I grew up in off Highway 59, the town I had not said out loud to anyone in years. The lights drew closer without moving. I stepped backward and hit the map table. The pins scratched the glass with a clean ice sound. The voice on the radio made a slow, shushing noise. I do not know why that calmed me, but something in me settled like a jar set carefully on a shelf. I moved to the window where the shape had been and looked out. The forest spread under the tower like a dark ocean. Between the trunks, light stirred in small constellations, not just a handful but hundreds, arranged in patterns that tugged at the back of my mind. The voice said another name, one I recognized from a news story I had half listened to a month earlier, a boy from Lagrange who had gone camping with a church group and never made it back to the pavilion. Then it said the name of a woman from Smithville, whose car had been found with the door open and the hazard lights blinking on a county road after a thunderstorm. The lights in the trees swelled and fell like breathing. It is one thing to be afraid. It is another to be catalogued. I turned to the map table and leaned over it. The map was of Bastrop County with contour lines tracing every folded inch. A series of marks in red pencil ran from the main trail to the tower, with neat hashes counting intervals. Along the southern edge, a column had been drawn in red with initials and dates that stopped 2 summers ago. At the bottom, someone had written "return" in the same hand. The word was underlined twice. The second underline had gouged the paper. The radio clicked a third time. The voice was closer now, a whisper that had nothing to do with the electronics. It came from the chair with its back to me. My skin went tight and my ribs ached as if something were pushing from the inside. I walked around the chair and saw that the seat was not empty after all. The lights made a kindly wash over what sat there, and for a second a part of my brain tried very hard to make it a person dozing. It was a shape of clothes arranged in the suggestion of a body. A uniform shirt folded with the sleeves filled by rolled canvas. Trousers stuffed with straw to give them shape. Boots laced around wood blocks. A hat sat at an angle on the top, a brim shadowing nothing. From the collar rose a bundle of filaments the color of old honey. A dozen or more strings that ran up like stretched sugar to the rafters and out through a small gap in the ceiling. They were not wires. They were alive. They throbbed with light at the same beat as the orbs gathered along the walls. My mouth went dry as chalk. The shape in the chair shifted a fraction, and the filaments thrummed in answer. The hat tipped and then righted itself. I reached out my hand without meaning to, and the nearest filament bowed toward it. The air smelled like after a storm when every leaf is scraped clean. When my fingertips neared the filament, I felt the softest prickle, a vibration like a cat purring somewhere under floorboards. The voice spoke again from everywhere and nowhere, and I understood at last that it was not words I was hearing, but an arrangement of electrical signals made into something my mind agreed to call a voice. It was asking me for something as simple as a direction. It wanted to know if I would go back down and walk where it told me. It wanted a return. I thought of the truck with its stubborn starter and the way the steering wheel has a nick at the bottom from when I clipped the gate latch last winter. I thought of my roommate and the lazy note on the counter. I thought of my mother who calls on Sundays, and the way she would say my name when I picked up on the second ring. The filaments brightened. The lights outside drew into a rough lane through the trees that a person could walk without touching so much as a twig. The map at my elbow showed the same lane in red pencil connecting dots like a child's game. I did not say yes out loud. I did not need to. The room felt my small surrender. The filaments eased back and the chair went still. The radio made a satisfied little pup. The lights drifted to the doorway and waited. I swallowed and followed them out to the platform. The staircase was a vertebrae of pale metals underfoot. I put my boot on the first tread and went down. The lane through the forest was real. It was not a burn scar or a game trail. It was a geometry laid among the trees where branches arched just enough and roots retreated just enough, and the ground gave just enough to make walking a kindness. The lights arranged themselves in pairs at knee height and shoulder height, and on the far sides of trunks so I could measure the width without touching. When I stepped a little off the line to test it, the filaments in the tower thrummed a single warning. I felt like a swallow of cold water. I returned to the path they showed. We moved together through the understory, past the drainage where sand whispered under my boots, over a place where I heard water but saw none, across a seam of rock that rolled like a buried spine. Somewhere an owl called once in a soft voice and then fell quiet as soon as the lights neared. I expected the lane to deliver me toward the rutted road where my truck waited. Reward for obedience. It did not. It drew me into a stand of pines planted in a regular grid, trees the same width, spaced like soldiers. At the far end of that grid, a small clearing opened, and a shape sat in it with the patience of a parked train car. It was not the tower. It was an old concrete vault. One of those hurricane stores built in the 40s when men dug into the red dirt and poured walls so thick you could punch them all day without producing dust. The hatch sat propped against a stump. On the hatch, someone had painted a number that rain and sun had peeled back to ancient skin. The lights gathered over the mouth of the vault and made a dim star. The air coming out of the vault was cool. It had a stagnation that comes from being left alone for a long time. But underneath that was the clean note from the tower, the after-storm scent. My steps made hollow sounds and the walls carried them down in stoic waves. The lights did not follow at first. They hovered at the threshold as if that line mattered to them. Then a few darted close in a triangle like a safety flag. I stepped down and waited for my eyes to make sense of the dark. What I took for shadow at the back revealed itself as a wall of glass. Shelf after shelf of old jars sat in careful rows, the kind of jars ranch families use for preserves and pickled okra, each one sealed with a brass ring and a disc of lid metal with a tiny dot in the middle. In every jar, something moved. It was not an animal. It was not a plant. It was the same milky current I had seen in the lights, concentrated into threads that curled and unfurled, testing the glass as if it had remembered it could be more. The jars had labels written in a hand I recognized now from the map. Bastrop 4H, June 2006. CCC Reunion, April 1982. Tower 3 repairs, August 1957. There were names on some, full names. I could hear the softest hum in the room, the sound of bees too polite to buzz. When I lifted a jar and tilted it, the currents inside aligned with the movement in a way that made my stomach suddenly cold. I should have run. I should have left the jar and climbed and walked without turning. Instead, I carried it to the hatch and held it up toward the light. The contents brightened and then dimmed like a living lung. The label on my jar had a date from 5 years ago, and a surname I knew from yard signs along a county road. The thought came to me whole and patient. The tower was not a watchman for fire. It had not been only that for a long time. It was a gatherer. It took bright things when they were just beginning to shine. It kept them in glass and called it duty. The lights that had led me here were parts of what could not be contained, parts that had learned to run the way a trickle runs from a poorly sealed lid. The voice returned then, not from the tower, but from a metal box on the vault wall. It issued a single word in that rubbed consonant tone, and I understood it like I had always known it. Return. The jars vibrated. The currents pressed their faces to the glass and left faint crescents like fingerprints. The lights at the hatch widened in sorrow or impatience. I placed the jar back as gently as I knew how and stepped toward the door. A filament brushed my wrist with a touch so delicate I could have made it up. It felt like hair, like the single soft hair that floats across your cheek and makes you think of a person who is not there. The lane led me into a section of forest lit by a diffuse glow. For a second I thought dawn had stolen a march on me. Then I saw the truck. It sat right where I had left it, angled half off the ruts, its windshield a gray mirror. The lights arranged themselves around it the way a careful group escorts a distracted child. They slowed as we reached the hood. They held their positions while I pulled the door and climbed in. I closed my hand around the key and hesitated. The after-storm smell was failing in the back of my nose like a dream scent. I turned the key. The starter made its saw blade noise and then caught. I let my hands rest at 10 and 2 and looked up. The lights hovered. A filament throbbed from somewhere far away. Then they rose, hundreds of them, straight up through the trees until they were no more than a scattering in the black. I drove toward where I thought the road must be. The tires found the ruts like tires do when they have gone a path once already. The bars on my phone stayed dead. At the first intersection of tracks, I felt sure I had not passed on the way in. I chose left. The forest had the feeling of an audience holding its breath at a stage door. When the first highway sign flashed in my headlights and showed me the familiar shield with its 5 points and the numbers I already knew by heart, my shoulders sagged. At the gas station on the edge of town, I parked under the buzzing canopy and smelled gasoline and hot metal and the onion sweetness of something frying down the block. A couple of teenagers sat on a tailgate trading sips from a bottle wrapped in brown paper. I went inside and stood in the fluorescent and stared at the rack of jerky and trail mix until the clerk asked if I needed help. I said no. When I pulled back onto the highway, the sky in the east had a knife-thin line of gray. I slept until noon and woke with the certainty that I could put the whole thing out to sea in the part of the mind where you exile nightmares. That lasted until my phone finally found a tower and a batch of old notifications marched in. Blinking banners that meant nothing. One was a news alert about a memorial at a small church outside Smithville. One was a text from my mother asking if I had remembered to water the ficus. One was a voicemail from a number I did not recognize. When I played it, static filled the first 3 seconds, then a voice said my first name like a parent calling a child in from the yard at dusk. It was not accusatory. It was not warm. It was a statement the forest had made of me. The last thing on the message was the click of a radio turning off. For days after, I tried to backtrack on a map. I drove the edges of county roads and looked for the turn I had missed. Every trailhead I stopped at had a normal state park sign with the normal rules. At the ranger station, a woman with clear eyes and a bun of gray hair told me the CCC tower had been removed after the fires years ago because people insisted on climbing it drunk. She said it with the tone of someone who has said it before and expects to say it again. When I asked if there had been more than one tower, she said there had been several, but budget and storms had taken them down and the ones left were fenced twice. She watched me as she said it and then handed me a glossy map. On the far corner, someone had stamped a date. The stamp ink was fresh. It did not help. At night, when I closed my eyes, I saw the lanes the lights had arranged and the geometry of a forest that had decided how you would move inside it. I told myself that biology could explain what I had witnessed, that the jars contained bioluminescent organisms like the kind that glow in coves near Corpus on a hot summer night, that the tower had been a prank set by kids with time and a knack for rigging electronics, that the voice was a radio bleed from some rancher on a frequency I happened to hit standing in that exact place. Then I would hear in my mind the way the filaments had hummed when I stepped off the lane and the scent would rise in my throat again. After storm. Clean leaf. Restored order. A week later, I took the glossy pamphlet from my pack and studied the little photograph in the corner. The ranger on the tower platform stared into a distance the picture could not show. A thin line of cloud lay over the horizon. In the shadows under the platform, you could make out a cluster of bright points that the development had not quite erased. Lights gathered in the space below like a family at a fence. I set the pamphlet on the table and smoothed it with my palm. Beneath the paper, the wood had a groove where someone had worried it with a knife. I do not go out after dark anymore. I do not step off a marked trail without the dumb reassurance of other hikers in sight. At night in my apartment, the ficus leaves shift and tap the window and my chest jumps like an animal on a spring. It is a small life and a safe one, and I keep it that way without apology. But sometimes when the rain ends and the city lights reflect on the wet streets like a second sky, I catch that scent and stand very still. The radio on my counter is silent. The filament in my memory brightens and eases. I understand then that what I left in the vault was not forgotten, and what I carried out with me still wants to guide, not to rescue but to return. The highway signs glow like patient faces. The forest waits beyond Bastrop where the ridges lift and the old paths still hold the shape of long use. The tower leans inside me at the angle of a difficult decision. Whether I say yes to that voice or whether I say nothing, the lights will know the way. They will gather when I am ready and lead wherever I choose to go, and the path they make will be a kindness until it closes around me and becomes what it wants. A lair and a ledger, a bright procession through the trees toward whatever sits atop the land and calls it duty. We rolled into the hill country at dusk, that watery gold hour when the limestone looks bruised and the cedar throws long, needling shadows. The park gate was still open, a metal arm lifted like it was waving us through. Past the office, the road dipped into a pocket of river scent and mesquite smoke. Lila leaned out her window and breathed deep, saying it smelled like a church with the lights off. Tyler snorted and said churches never smelled like damp leaves and somebody's burnt sausage. Marisol was quiet. She was running a finger along the cord of the lantern as if she could read the night ahead by touch. We found our spot along a slow bend of the Frio. Not the crowded loops near the dance pavilion, but the primitive sites up a little slope, where the rock was pale and flaked underfoot, and the oaks had big hollow hearts. We had 4 chairs. That was all we owned between us. Mine was a cracked blue thing with a frayed cup holder that dropped cans after a minute. Lila's was red, the logo long gone. Tyler had brought one of those padded monstrosities like a miniature recliner. Marisol's was simple and black, a kind of shadow with armrests. We set them around the ring of stones, coaxed a fire that breathed low and steady, and boiled pasta in a dented pot. The river talked to itself in the dark. Coyotes tried a half-hearted chorus from the ridge, and something bigger broke brush to the east. It felt like every Texas night I grew up with, heavy in the bones, patient. We told the same old stories you tell on first nights. The kind that have worn corners, about the devil's backbone and the crying girl at the low-water crossing, the headless mule near Bandera, the leaked video of a pale thing climbing down a billboard along I-10. None of them stuck. When we crawled into our tents, I lay awake and listened to the wind fumble at the fly and the soft ticking of embers settling. I woke to coffee and the river shining like the belly of a fish and an extra chair at the fire. It was facing the pit, pulled up close, a half step closer than mine had been. It wasn't one of ours. It was the color of faded denim with white piping along the edges, an old-school camp chair with cross-braced legs, the kind they stopped making when cup holders became law. The fabric was stained darker where a back had rested. Tyler was poking it as if it might lunge. Lila said maybe it had blown from another site during the night. The morning had that weird folded quiet that comes after voices, the way the trees listen to what you say and don't say. I touched the seat and jerked my hand back. It was warm, not sun-warm, body warm, deep and recent. We did the thing you do. We laughed and talked about prankster teenagers. We checked the loop. No empty camps, no mismatched set. The nearest site had a family in matching orange chairs with a dachshund that shook itself like it was trying to fly apart. The camp host, a lean man with a white beard and a baseball cap, was puttering past in a golf cart. Tyler waved him down and asked if anyone had reported a missing chair. The host leaned over, looked at it, and his face creased in a way I didn't like. He said folks lose things out here. He said if nobody claimed it, we could drop it by the office. He said like an afterthought not to fold it after dark. He said it like someone taught him to say it that way, a set of words that came with the job. We dragged it a little ways from the fire to make room for the cooler. It was heavier than it looked. A surprising drag, like there was a person in it who didn't want to be moved. I almost said sorry to a piece of fabric and aluminum. The day went on. We swam at a gravel bar downstream where the current deepened to green and slid under a shelf of blue rock, so smooth it looked wet even when it wasn't. The sun baked everything flat. When we came back toward evening and lit the fire, we made jokes about offering the mystery chair a beer. Lila flicked a pecan shell into the coals and said we should leave it alone and stop acting like kids. When the night climbed into the oaks and the stars rubbed their shoulders on the leaves, I felt the stupid urge to glance at that chair again and again, to measure where it sat. It sat closer. I hadn't seen it move, but it sat closer, angled toward the flame like a person leaning in to hear. The air pulled tight behind my neck as if someone laughed softly there. I drank more than I meant to. Tyler said he'd take first watch as if this were a siege and saluted us with his headlamp. We were in that joking circle, the one you get when everybody wants to tiptoe away from the thought. I fell asleep to light and woke at 2 with my mouth dry and the fire low, and Tyler snoring in his padded throne. The blue chair sat empty. A white moth drifted through its rectangle of darkness like a thought gone to the wrong home. When I put my palm on the seat to test my sanity, heat pulsed into me. Not just warmth, but something like the come down of adrenaline. The way your body heat feels haunted after a scare. I snatched my hand and went to wake Tyler. He opened one eye and told me to stop messing with the scene. He said I'd catch a splinter of aluminum and get tetanus. He could joke even when half asleep. We tucked in for the second night with a new rule. Nobody touched the blue chair after dark. We made a theater of it, stepping around it like an altar. Marisol, who rarely spoke when liquor ran in her, surprised us all. She cupped her hands and called to the river as if it were a person we had invited. She said if somebody wanted a place at the fire, they had one. She said if someone had been waiting longer than us, we weren't the kind to chase them off. Lila told her to hush and not invite the world. But the words were already floating out there, and sometimes words are bigger than you. The second morning we had 5 chairs again. Not the same 5. Tyler's throne had gone missing. In its place was another stranger. Green this time, a brand I hadn't seen in 20 years, with a woven webbing on the seat and rust creeping like ivy up the back legs. A crushed cigarette lay in its cup holder, a brand I only ever saw Uncle smoke at fish fries. Tyler was furious in a small, sick way. He scoured the site. He said he'd chained his to the picnic table and there was the chain, clipped clean as if by teeth. The host rolled by and lifted 2 fingers and didn't stop. Marisol touched the new chair and withdrew her hand and said quietly it was warm. We didn't laugh. We took the chairs and lined them up along the rock like an audience waiting on their own stage. I pocketed the cigarette without thinking. Later, under the oak, I looked at the brand name. I'd seen those in a bait shop near Leakey as a kid, a stack behind the counter with a yellow tax stamp that looked like a county map. The stamp on this one was bleached, but I could make out a date. 2 decades ago if it was real. And the green webbing chair had a tag looped through its frame where an old paper reservation tag might go. The ink was watery and half gone, but you could read the start of a last name and site numbers that didn't match any loop I knew. I carried the tag to the office, and the woman there took it and said nothing for a long time, then brought it back and gave me 2 free bags of ice. Her eyes slid around me like minnows spooked by a shadow. That night the wind picked up and marched the trees. We built the fire high and then felt ridiculous because the heat made the strange chairs seem more comfortable, as if we were indulgent hosts. We tried the camera trick. Tyler set his phone on a tripod facing the circle. Lila marked the dirt with a stick, little notches where each chair sat. Marisol braided grass into a ring and set it around the blue seat, a childish ward. We arranged our 4 in a square and left the strangers outside it. We told lighter stories. We turned in. The night was all the old noises, but each noise had a partner, a thinner echo as if something underlaid it, matching steps half a beat behind. I woke at 3 to the sound of fabric creaking, a small domestic noise, the complaint a chair gives when someone shifts their weight. I didn't get up. Fear sometimes wears the face of patience. It tells you waiting is wiser. We watched the footage over eggs. At exactly 1:32, the screen whited out and stayed a frost of static and flares until 2:59. The last clear frame before the snow showed the blue chair outside the grass ring, and the first clear frame after it showed the chair inside, the grass ring neatly remade around its legs. Lila held the phone as if it were warm from an animal's belly. Tyler said we had a glitch, a cheap phone, a thing to be explained later while you were drinking. He went to the truck and came back with a coil of rope. He tied the legs of the blue chair to the picnic table in a humorless knot and looped the rope around the table like a pen for a mean dog. The rope made a sound when it pulled tight that made a place behind my ear feel hollow. The wind came and went. The river talked. A branch somewhere gave up. The ranger found us mid-morning. Not the host, but an actual ranger with a badge and the official green shirt. He had a flake of rock in his boot tread and the look of someone who had been told to do a thing he disliked. He asked about the rope. Tyler told him the truth with a laugh that made no one want to laugh. The ranger listened, eyes on the chair, then at us, then at the rope. He said some things weren't ours to correct. He said the hill country made its own manners and you were wise to learn them. He said if an extra place appeared, it meant someone had declared themselves. He said in his careful way that sometimes the river took people, that the rock and the undercuts looked solid until they didn't. He said you had to leave what the river asked for, or it would keep asking. He told us to put the rope away. He told us to quit filming and be respectful after dark because the cameras never recorded what you think they record. He didn't write a citation. He tipped his hat and left a wake behind him in the dust. We never agreed to stay. We didn't agree to leave. The afternoon tugged at us lazily, and we let it. We walked up the ridge and stood in the white heat and looked down at the tree line along the river like a green bruise. A turkey vulture banked and kept its distance like it thought we smelled of something it didn't want today. We came back and the blue chair sat a little cocked, like a person waiting for the thread of a joke. Lila gathered driftwood and made a small ordered stack. Marisol took the lantern and polished its glass until it was clear. Tyler sharpened a stick until it was nothing. I broke pecan shells and let the meat sit on my tongue before I chewed. None of it mattered. Dusk came like a hand closing. The fourth chair appeared the fourth morning. That was the way we counted it. We woke to 4 we had brought and 4 we had not. The new one was kid-sized. It had little cartoon fish on the seat and a mesh pocket in the back filled with grit and a wet leaf. No one touched that one. It sat affronted and undeniably warm. Marisol went a little white around the mouth and told us about a news clipping she had read in a coffee shop near here. One of those boards with yellowed articles pinned up alongside church BBQ flyers. A family had been lost in a flash flood not far from this loop. A storm that had come down out of clear skies upstream and turned a placid run into a wall. No bodies recovered, only their sight found afterward. Chairs in a near circle, cups still in the holders, the coals warm at dawn. The article had a slant of respect in it, like it was telling you about the weather as a person. The picture was too washed out to see faces. The date matched the cigarette tax stamp in my pocket. We told ourselves we would leave that day. We loaded coolers and shook sand from the tent floors and folded our 4 chairs. The strangers sat in their patience. Tyler hoisted them and carried them to the edge of the road, dropping them under a blackjack oak as if to break the line of sight with our ring of stones. When he came back to the truck bed, the blue chair lay folded under our sleeping bags. He swore so softly it made me like him again. We sat. We waited for the certainty you need to drive away. It didn't come. The day grayed over early. Wind dragged something heavy across the sky. When the rain started, it wasn't a storm but a decision. The drops were big and far apart and somehow louder than their size. We slid the coolers under the picnic table and hunched beneath the fly and listened to the old country sound of rain on nylon. We ought to have laughed, Marisol hummed. She said it sounded like a song she'd heard at a river baptism. In that small, close world under the fly, the chairs moved. Not all at once. Not like a horror show. You turned your head and a moment had arranged itself and you could name the difference but not its birth. The blue chair and the green and the kid one were inside the shelter where there had not been room. There was no way to claim they had been there all along. Lila's mouth tightened the way it did when she had to fire someone. Tyler said he was going to sleep in the truck. He made it 4 steps before the sound came, a scraping like aluminum teeth biting stone, and he stopped. He looked down. There was a line in the dust between his feet, a line the width of a chair leg from the ring to where he stood, as if a thing had walked up next to him and then slid away when he saw it. He came back and settled and pretended to be cold. The rain did what rain does. It made us confess small things. I would have said sorry to anyone at that moment. I would have apologized to the river for running between its banks. Sometime before dawn, a new voice joined our small noises. It was a soft inhalation, the sound of someone listening right before they speak, and it came from the extra place. If you have slept in company, you know the rhythm of the people you love. This breath did not belong to us. Lila opened her eyes and they were immediately wet. She reached for my hand under the blanket with a grip hard enough to hurt. Marisol sat up straight as if someone had said her name very close and very kindly. When we lit the lantern, there was nothing but fabric and aluminum, and the seat sagged as if it held a shape that could not survive the light. We lost Marisol the 5th morning. I don't know a more honest way to say it. I woke with the sore mouth of having held my teeth clenched through dreams, and there were 9 chairs in a precise, elegant arc around a blackened oval of ash. Ours had multiplied. Theirs had multiplied, as if the math of the night were merciful and cruel in the same breath. Marisol's blanket was folded at the base of the black chair, neat in a way she never would have chosen. Her boots were side by side and damp at the edges. Her name was a refusal in my throat. We made all the necessary noise anyway. We called her name. We waded the shallows and shouted upstream. The ranger came. The host came. The family with the dachshund stood 50 yards off like a painted scene and didn't approach. The ranger took down details in the way of someone who knew the shape the day would take. He did not touch the chairs. He asked us to pack up and leave. He said they would do what they could. He did not put any promise in his voice because men like that don't. Not when the river is involved. We left because there was no more staying. The road out bent and then bent again and showed us the same cluster of oaks as if the world were a loop. We made it to the gate because the world relented. At a gas station in Leakey, I went into the men's room and put my face in my hands and watched my ugliness in the cracked mirror. When I came out, Lila had the truck bed open and her hands flat on the sleeping bags as if holding down a skittish animal. The blue chair was there, folded under the lash strap, warm enough to steam in the October air. She laughed, a sick little bark. And then she cried the way you cry when you have wanted to your whole life and finally get to. No one behind the counter asked why we bought duct tape and rope and a knife. We drove a long way in a straight line because it felt like the only thing left to try. The chairs didn't stay at the park. They came with us. They were reasonable parasites. They never showed themselves when anyone else was around. They never inconvenienced us with an audience. I slept 3 nights in my apartment in San Antonio with the slider locked and still woke each morning to an extra chair on the balcony, facing in, its seat warm to my palm, the city light making its fabric look wet. I moved it into the stairwell and the old woman from down the hall asked if we were having a party. I told her no and she laughed nervously and said, "You never know who brings what into a building." I tried to ignore it. I tried to imagine I had always owned more chairs. But there is a number in your head that belongs to you. When it changes, you know. Grief and fear are cousins and they bring gifts you don't want. The gift I got was a clarity that felt like a good insult. It told me that nothing that had started by the river would stop on its own. The chairs were an invitation, an account, and a debt. The ranger had halfway said it and stopped. The blue and the green and the kid one were not random. They were part of a seating chart like the ones Lila made with sticky notes on her office wall. A shape that meant something before our 4 ever set foot on the bank. I took one chair. Not mine, the blue one. I put it in the back of my car and drove along 90 in a heat that had no business still being around. I passed pecan stands and tire shops and a herd of goats standing on a busted hay bale and an empty feed store porch with a Coke machine humming to itself like a soft mistake. I went back to the park. I went back to the place where the oaks were, and the river talked like a person you trusted in your childhood. The site was empty. It looked like any other Wednesday had looked to a new ranger. The ring of stones remembered us in the way things remember, a slight depression, a color that was more dark than the rest. I set the blue chair where it wanted to be. Don't ask me how I knew, I did. I lit a small fire and felt foolish for honoring a shape that had done nothing but take. The river made the same language it always makes. Dusk came and the bats took their little ration of mosquitoes. I said Marisol's name. I said it the way you say a prayer when you are from a family that mispronounces prayers. I said I was sorry for my proud blood and my need to explain what didn't belong to me. I said I would give back anything I had if it would be counted as enough. The night didn't answer the way stories arrange it. No sudden wind. No visible weight pressing into the seat. The curve of the river darkened until it was a cut in the shape of something's smile. I slept because a body will. I woke to a quiet that was not empty but full. The dawn showed an extra chair, not mine, not the green or the kid, but one of those metal lawn chairs with the woven plastic you find on porches in towns that have one cafe and a mechanic who keeps a milk crate by the register for paying bills. It was white. The plastic was the pale of old teeth. It was warm. I sat in it because the thought came and would not be refused. I sat in the extra place and waited to be punished or forgiven. What I felt was weight, not heavy in pounds, heavy in presence. The sense of someone sitting with me without touching me, sharing the chair without any of their body needing to. There was a smell of river mint and cigarette paper and a wet dog and the chemical sweetness of lighter fluid. My eyes filled the way a person's eyes fill when they see their parent come through the door, after an absence they were too young to name. I said hello. A pressure like a hand settled on my shoulder, brief and grateful. The breath I had heard under the fly moved through me like a breeze through a screen. I thought of all the chairs that had appeared at fires across this country, and all the vacant places worth warming. I thought of how the worst thing is not the cold, it's being expected by something that will wait as long as it has to. I don't know if it was an hour or a minute. I know when I stood, the chair was no longer warm. It was a tool again, not a seat for anyone whole. I walked to the river with it and set it on the gravel bar where the current thinned, facing upstream into the green throat of water that makes this place itself. I told the river to do its job. The chair sat quiet and eventual. I went back to the ring of stones and sat in my own chair and watched the light widen. The kind of morning you would keep if you could. You already know what came next. A scraping behind me. A soft breath. The light touch of fabric shifting as a person sat. Not in my chair. In another that wasn't there before. I turned and there it was. Red with a logo I knew. Scuffed across the front bar from the time I dragged it across a sidewalk in Del Rio for a parade. I understood it then, with the clarity grief has taught me. The count wasn't about strangers. It was about attendance. We had made a circle, and circles invite. Whoever had once sat there would see the fire and come again. They needed nothing more than a place. They needed a host with the humility not to measure out comfort like rationed sugar, and something in the math always stayed one ahead of us. If I stayed the day, I would end the day with one more seat than I began with. If I left, the extra would come with me, because that's how hospitality works when you aren't the only one doing the inviting. I packed quietly and made the motions of a person who believes in small outcomes. I left the red chair in place the way you leave food in a cemetery and don't tell anyone. Not because you are ashamed, but because you are decent. I walked to the gate and didn't look back. On 83, I pulled into a turnout and tried to stretch the knot from my back. A little boy in the back of a passing pickup waved 3 times with all the solemnity a kid can muster. The 3rd time he pointed behind me, his mouth an O. I didn't need to turn to know. The extra seat was already there in my open trunk, folded and warm, patient to be arranged beside whatever small fire I made tonight. Somewhere else along the river, another circle would be forming. A family on their first trip with new chairs bought at a hardware store, or an old man who came because he liked the sound of water, or a woman needing a weekend where her phone didn't boss her. A chair would be waiting for them by dawn, and if they held out long enough, if they made it through the little humiliations fear dishes out, if they let the math have its way, they might come to know the simplest and most merciless rule this place keeps. There is always one more seat than you set. There is always one more breath in the circle. There is always one more chair, warm from someone who will not call themselves gone.